Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптя посорбати довбані щі, та трохи в ущах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
Hello everybody, and welcome to days 103 and 104 of the news.
And tonight, we'll of course be covering the past 48 hours of the war in Ukraine on day 103 and day 104. I hope y'all didn't miss me too much over the Monday break. Sadly, I didn't put out a summary. I was literally exhausted yesterday, and so sadly, I couldn't make myself make a Monday summary. I was just that tired. I still am a little bit tired today, but the show never stops. I made a promise that we're going to cover this news until this war ends, and promises are always upheld. And so this will keep on going until a peace resolution is made. But also, another thing is that I wanted to say that this channel and all of the soldiers of the Lee Spring Army have now raised $290,000 in funds in support of Ukraine. This has gone to multiple nonprofits. Our nonprofit on Sunday, which got around $8,600, which was well over our $5,000 goal, was Revive Soldiers for Ukraine, which of course helps out soldiers that are fighting inside of Ukraine with rehabilitation and also medical care for serious injuries. So I have to give it to everyone once again for helping out those soldiers on the ground and also trying to support Ukraine as much as possible. It means a lot to me. I know it means a lot to the Lysychansk army because every single weekend we go above and beyond in making sure that we provide for Ukraine as much as we possibly can. And so I want to thank you all once again from the bottom of my heart. I know that millions of Ukrainians would thank you all if they had the chance for all the help that we continuously do every single week here on this channel. We are only around 10.5 thousand, I think, away from $300,000. And I think that this upcoming Sunday, we're now going to be going back up to our large fundraising goals of around 20,000 or so again. I think we can reach it. I don't know about y'all, but I have a lot of faith in the Lysychansk army, of course, and I think that anything is possible and we'll be able to reach that $300,000 mark and even go well beyond. And so, without gassing up the Lysychansk army too much, let's get into tonight's schedule. Starting off, we'll actually be skipping Kyiv. There's no news in Kyiv to speak of that, I guess you could say, is not Zelensky's speech. So sadly, we'll be skipping the Kyiv area today, and we'll be moving straight into Russia to see a sickening sight, but I'm going to show it to y'all later on. And we'll also be going deep into Russia near Lake Baikal, to an area near Irkutsk, where we've seen some interesting information today. Once we cover that Russian news, we're then going to be going straight into Ukraine to cover the location unknowns. Of course, we've had a decent amount of them because this is both day 103 and day 104 combined, and so we'll be covering all of the blue and the dark gray spots on this map and talking about what we've seen there. Once we get done with that section, before we move on to the Kharkiv and northern Donbass area, we're of course going to pause to take 3 questions from the chat. After we take those 3 questions, we're then going to move through the Kharkiv area, down towards the northern Donbass area, and then once we cover all of the news in the northern Donbass, we're then going to start covering the southern Donbass and also the southern front. But before we get there, we're once again going to take a pause and answer another 3 questions from the chat. After we do that, we'll cover all of the southern front, also the stuff that happened out in the Black Sea today, and then finally, we'll be covering what's left in the rest of the country, which is in Lviv, and also we'll be wrapping up today's news, of course, as usual, with a speech, not a peach, from President Zelensky. And so, of course, I'm very excited to report the news. There's been a decent amount of good news today, but there's also a little bit of news that I've said was going to happen for a while. I actually backtracked on it in all honesty a little bit because it seemed like the Ukrainians may have had other plans, but it appears that they're going with my original assumption now. But we'll cover that later once we get to Severodonetsk, which is what I'm talking about. Starting off in Moscow, we've seen a Russian patriot doing his duty. Now, it's nearly impossible to get a Russian citizen, especially a man, to ever sign off on any kind of patriotic list so that way they can be called up for service. We've seen that time and time again on this channel, that Russian men in general do not want to serve in the military. They'll talk all of the big talk, of course, about dying for their country and fighting for it and doing whatever they need. But when it actually comes down to it, they are never willing to actually go into the service and fight for their country. But we can see that one man today, he finally stood up, and he decided to make a change in Russia. This man decided to face down 2 little school children on a train, corner them in the side of the rail car, and then force them to take off their backpack just because it had blue and yellow on it. And it's not even a Ukrainian flag backpack, as you'll see. It has like some kind of animal on the back of it. But just because the color is blue and yellow are on the backpack at the same time, this older guy, this man, is going to bully these little kids who have no idea what's going on, really, and mess with them. So here's the video. I'm going to let y'all see this for yourselves. It's honestly unbelievable. We can now see him kind of harass the kid, pulling him forward and trying to get the backpack off of him. Wait a minute. Okay, here's the thing. We know it's not a Ukrainian flag. You can see the little feet of whatever this thing's supposed to be, and it looks like it may be some kind of like a sea turtle backpack or something. But this guy's still going to act like it's a Ukrainian image to this kid who really has no idea about politics. I mean, like, he hardly even knows how to multiply at this point, probably. And this guy's just going to harass the kid. Now he's going to drop the backpack in front of the kid. Now the kid's putting the backpack back on. This guy's just going to stand in front of the kid and harass him. I don't know about y'all, but what a jerk. I mean, like, to really start bullying little kids on a school train and that's all you're going to do? I mean, like, if this guy was so patriotic about being a Russian, why not join the service? Why not fight for his country if he believes in it so much? Instead, this guy's going to waste his time dressed in rags, hopping on a train and bullying little kids about their backpacks that they probably have no control of. His parents, of course, bought that backpack for that kid, and he's just wearing it just because it's his backpack, but this guy's going to take offense to it having blue and yellow on it at the same time. This is stupidity at its finest. I would honestly say, of course, I'm not going to say this is typical Russian behavior, but this is the typical behavior of a quote-unquote Russian patriot, is to beat up little kids and innocent people, much like they do in Ukraine when they kill citizens in Kherson and Bucha Hospital, European area, and so on, to just do this to innocent people who have no idea what's going on. So with that, we're now going to be moving further into Russia and out of kind of like the social aspect of things. And sorry if I did get heavily opinionated there, but I think that kids in general ought to be left out of a lot of stuff. That kid's obviously so young, he has no clue what's going on. And this guy is just going to pick a fight with some kid on a train. Didn't make any sense to me. Anyways, we're now going to be moving on deep into Russia, into the far east, near the Lake Baikal area, and the city of Irkutsk, or at least surrounded. Here we can see a video of Uragan MLRS on the way, along with other support vehicles and a different kind of MLRS that we'll see in the video. Here we can see the train pulling by, and we can now see all of the Uragans that are being transported west. We can also see the loading vehicles. These are loading vehicles. You can see that they don't actually have the rocket launchers, I guess you could say, on the back. These are actually cradles where they hold the rockets, and they also appear to have a crane on them that then picks up these rockets, and then they load it into the MLRS, and then that requires a whole other truck of the exact same make and model without the cradle and without the crane, where they then place the missiles down and they slide them into the tubes. It's a very complicated process. Reloading an Uragan requires 3 vehicles, the launcher, the I guess you could call it the crane, and also a flatbed to load it on. It is highly complicated, but we've seen both sides using them to a large degree, and so apparently the logistical complications involved in resupplying them are considered just a part of the system. Apparently they consider the advantages of it to far outweigh the disadvantages of how difficult it is to reload these systems. We can then see some kind of command MTLB, sorry, I just messed that up. But apparently some kind of command MTLB. Apparently the command MTLBs are a little bit taller. We can also see some Ural 4350s on the back. I'm assuming that this is, of course, part of the supply portion of this artillery unit. Of course, more Urals, more Kamazes. We can now see an unidentified artillery piece. It appears that it uses the same chassis as the Chulpan heavy mortar, but unfortunately, I don't know the exact name of this one, so I'm just gonna have to be honest here and say I don't know what this thing is, but apparently it's artillery that is attached to the Uragans. From here, it says the 152 millimeter Giasint. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but apparently these are 152 millimeter Giasint cannons, or Giasint. I'm not really sure which way it's pronounced, but we can see that those are also attached to the unit. And we can see that they have a pretty sizable number of those artillery pieces. We can now see some normal freight wagons attached to the back, and some more MTLBs near the rear. These, of course, are heading west. It's going to be a long trip for this unit, of course. They pretty much have to travel almost the entirety of the Trans-Siberian Railway across Russia. And just to give you all a perspective of how long the distance is that they'll have to cover in miles, in a straight line as the crow flies, they'll have to move that whole entire consist some 2,700 miles for it to finally reach the Ukrainian front. While that's a very long distance, I believe that a train on the Trans-Siberian Railway covers the entire length within 9 days, and so that train will most likely make it to Ukraine within the next week. So still interesting to see. I don't think that artillery is going to be doing much of a difference. We've seen that no matter how much in terms of units and power the Russians throw at the Ukrainians, it appears that no progress can be made whatsoever. So I wouldn't really consider that all too concerning. We've seen this time and time again throughout the entirety of the war, and it's never really amounted to much. So with that, we're now going to be moving into Ukraine itself, and we're going to get straight into the location unknowns. Of course, we're going to start off on day 103, which is the blue dots, and then we're going to move on to day 104, which is our dark gray dots. Starting off on day 103, we've seen a Ukrainian, of course, give a how-to. Ukrainians love how-tos, but we can see them giving a how-to on how to use an in-law anti-tank system. The in-law is commonly used. Let me make sure I'm correct on this because I don't want to leave anyone out. In-law. And let's look at Wikipedia, of course. Wikipedia isn't the most reliable source, but it's pretty decent. We can see that apparently it was produced by the Swedes and the UK. Surprisingly enough, a lot of people don't know this about Sweden, but Sweden actually has a very interesting and very detached, I guess you could say, arms industry compared to the rest of the world. They produce a lot of their vehicles in-house. Of course, the STRV-122, which they're using these days, is a license-built version of the Leopard 2A5, but nonetheless, most of their stuff is actually produced within Sweden and Swedish designed. And we can see that apparently this was a cooperation in between the British and the Swedes to design this anti-tank weapon. So, of course, interesting to see, a little interesting tidbit. Of course, it doesn't have anything to do with Ukraine directly, but it's always interesting to delve into the histories of the weapon systems that the Ukrainians are using, and also the West is using. But let's see, how many countries use this? Let's see if we can get any operators. We can see the Finns use it, of course. Indonesia, interestingly enough, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Sweden, Switzerland actually has ordered more units in 2017 than the Swedes did in 2005. Really interesting. We can, of course, see that the Ukrainians have some now, and we can see that the British field the in-law anti-tank system the most. And so if we were to assume who sent these in-laws over, it's most likely the British that have sent these in-laws over to the Ukrainians. So credit to the British or the Swedes if they were also the ones that provided these arms and equipment. I know the Swiss haven't because they largely stayed neutral, and while they have taken economic action against the Russians, I don't think they've ever sent military arms and aid to the Ukrainians. So with that, here's the video. I'm just going to let this thing run, and he explains how to use an in-law to the common person. So just in case if you're going to Ukraine and you happen to get your hands on an in-law, here's the video of a Ukrainian soldier giving you a quick crash course on how to use it.
Hello guys, today I would like to introduce you and do a little bit of review of the sub-defense in-law anti-tank system. Basically, when you unpack the in-law itself, the single-use rocket, you have accumulator placed in front of the container. Accumulator have 2 pins, so you need apply some pressure to seat the battery in. The best is not just slap it, but when you squeeze those 2, you can seat it without any violence. You do this before mission to put the rocket itself into the combat order, so all systems are functioning. For demonstration purposes, I will remove it, so I can press all the buttons, right? So, first is the basic setting. The fuse itself, or more accurately the finder, activates in 20 meters, which is the minimal distance, or from 100 meters upwards, yeah? So if you know you have any metallic object, like for example vehicle, some piece of machinery, or another beaten down tank, in that distance about 70 meters, you flip this to activate the magnetic finder in the distance over 100 meters. But generally you want it, if you have close engagement, basically the closest distance from which the rocket is active. Then we have top attack, or we have direct action. So direct action is against unarmed targets. Top attack it's on all the tanks, all the armored vehicles, but the in-law itself, it's not the top attack in javelin sense. It doesn't need that much distance, the rocket, to raise up. It basically fly over the target and then explode the shape charge, so even in distance of 20 meters you can have the top attack mode activated.
Now that's something really interesting to me. For my American viewers, 20 meters is around, I'd say 60 feet, or of course around 20 yards. A meter is very similar to length in a yard. And so apparently in the course of 60 feet, this thing can gain enough I guess you could say, altitude, to be able to fly over a tank and then explode top down into it. That's what most modern Western anti-tank weapon systems do. For example, the Javelin does that as well. And the TOW-2Bs, which are used largely by the United States, also have that feature in them where they explode over the target instead of on the side. The reason why is because the roof of most vehicles is one of the weakest spots, along with the bottom of the tank. That's why you'll largely see that mines are incredibly effective, and also top-down aerial attacks back in the day used to be very effective on tanks as well. And so the principle behind this was, well, obviously, if the armor on the front of a tank or the side is so strong that this can't get through it, then why not just have it fly over the top of the thing and then explode down into it, and then that will do the same trick. It'll just be a lot easier, and it doesn't need that much penetrating power. And so that's why a lot of Western systems have now gone to the top-down attack system instead of directly into the tank, like flying right into it and hitting it. So, of course, that's really interesting, and it's really cool to see that the NLAW itself can actually do that from an incredibly close range. I don't think if you were within 60 feet of a Russian tank, you would be alive. I feel like, of course, not giving the Russians too much credit, they suck, but at the same time, it would be a little difficult to get that close. But of course, if they ever did, it looks like they'll be in pretty good shape. Also, note the little sticker that they put on the back. That was pretty funny. Anyways, I'm going to let this video continue. Of course, we're going to skip through it a little bit because it does go on for a pretty long while, and a lot of y'all do not have an NLAW to use, but still, it's a very educational video.
Here we can see an add-on module for the night vision. The night vision module we don't have here, but there are those floating around. So if you're putting night vision on, you have this extra rail. Then we have this plus minus, this whole separate thing, just for night vision use. But for us, we have only ACOG. To deploy the ACOG from the transport position, we press this level. Press like so.
Now, everyone, I just saw something very interesting in the live chat. We're going to pause this for a second and actually pull this up. Melted Cheetah asks, can they reload those NLAW things, right? Or is it one and done? I actually don't know the answer to that. I feel like it most likely be reusable, but I'm not entirely sure. So let's see. Let's pull that up. NLAW reload. Not the law. We're looking for the NLAW. Designed as a single use, the NLAW can't be reloaded. So there's our answer. The NLAW cannot be reloaded. It's apparently fired one and done, kind of like a Panzerfaust, if y'all remember that from the Second World War, which was also a one and done kind of system, which is really interesting to me because the Javelin can actually be used multiple times, but apparently the NLAW cannot. So we're going to let the video continue. I'm actually going to skip forward a little bit towards the end.
System is extremely capable. It can beat basically any modern tank, including those with cope cages. Now we will just look at how to deploy it in the field.
Now we got into the good part.
So yes, you get to the position, you have your accumulator already in.
And I can see a lot of y'all saying it seems to be wasteful, but one must remember that war is a very wasteful thing. And while this does seem wasteful, which is kind of true, at the same time, using a tank is very wasteful, because if a tank gets destroyed, you're losing dozens of tons of just steel, composite materials, all kinds of high-tech equipment like sights and such things like that. And whenever you put anything on the battlefield, it's always incredibly wasteful. Even brass is very wasteful from firing just a normal small arm. So, while wasteful, I can't understand where the West is coming from. They're putting a lot of effort into these kinds of systems to make sure that if you only use them once, and if it is wasteful, it's going to get the job done once, instead of, for example, with a Russian system where you may have to do it twice, or it may not even work ever. So now we're going to see him set it up and show us how to use the thing, which is honestly crazy to me that we can see this on the internet now, that people are literally doing how-to basic videos in Ukraine. But anyways, we're going to let the video continue.
You press, deploy your ACOG, you can deploy your butt plate and your monopod, like so. Place it onto the target. The handles themselves are very comfy, very user-friendly. Press pause
This guy, hang on, I got a good laugh out of that. This guy said, the handles are very comfortable. It's very user-friendly. Like he's trying to sell a Mercedes-Benz or something. He's like, the steering wheel fits in your hands incredibly well. I don't think he has to sell anyone on this thing, but it looks like he's trying, and he's doing a pretty good pitch at it, honestly.
It's already off. We're leading the target, looking at the system, pressing by thumb, fire and forgot. The monopod you can extend all the way to the ground, like so, or you can use it as a support against your body.
Now that's very interesting. I actually didn't know that these things had a monopod on them or any kind of, I guess you could say, support. So that's something new to me that I just learned in this video. I hope you all didn't know that either, because that's cool.
So yes, that's a quick guide how to use the NLAW anti-tank system. Thank you.
And while that guy said thank you, I think we should be thanking him for his service to Ukraine and also giving us a very informational video to watch about the NLAW system and how it works. So with that, we're going to have to say goodbye to Professor NLAW. We had Professor Mortar, now we have Professor NLAW. So everyone say goodbye to Mr. NLAW, because sadly we have to move on to our next bit of location unknown news. Here in this next video, we can of course see a 2S1 SPG being used by the Ukrainians, firing at a very rapid pace. Hopefully this video loads. For some reason it didn't want to load, but now it is loading. Good. Also, one other thing is that when I start off this video, I've already said this before on a previous stream, so I'm not going to harp on this too much, but notice how clean the interior of this SPG is. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, and y'all know my whole speech about cleanliness is next to godliness, and it shows professionalism, we're now going to watch this video. We can see him loading the charge in. So I believe he already has the shell in. He did. He fired. The charge fell to the ground. They're now loading the next shell. They're now loading the propellant. The breech closes. The gun's ready to fire. Shell drops to the ground. They repeat the process. And you can see that this man is working at an incredibly fast pace. Now see them reloading again. And I think whenever the Ukrainians operate artillery, they are going for record-setting figures in terms of how fast they can reload. We've seen this a little bit with the M777. They were very slow operating those at the start, but it's understandable because they didn't actually get trained on that system. But now we can see with a 2S1, which they've been using ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, we can see that they are trying to go for speed records on speed loading these things if possible. And that's something that is very admirable in the artillery, because they only have a certain amount of time that they can shoot their pieces before they have to scoot. I've, of course, gone over shoot and scoot before a lot on this stream, but it's something very important. If they sit around for too long, they are going to get shot back at by the Russians. And so, you know, I'm not going to actually say what's the perfect time, but let's say it's like 5 minutes. They have 5 minutes to sit there and fire off as many rounds as they can accurately on a position and then pack up and leave. And so it's very good to see that they're keeping up a high rate of fire like this. So we're going to let the video continue and see how fast they can keep up this rate of fire. We now see them standing by. We now see them firing again. And of course, the soldier is going for the speed loading record here. Firing again and again. This single 2S1 operator here is probably accounting for an entire artillery barrage downrange with how fast this thing is firing. And if there's another 2 or 3 in this artillery battery, which is of course logical to assume, then we know that the Russians are getting obliterated downrange because the rate of fire they're keeping up is unbelievable. I haven't even counted how many rounds they've fired, but all of these rounds have been fired in almost under a minute. So you can imagine the level of barrage that the Ukrainians are sending downrange. With that, that's the end of the video, but of course, an incredibly clean SPG showing the professionalism and the level of care that Ukrainians go through in their service, and we can also see that the speed at which they're reloading this piece also shows us that not only does the cleanliness convey their professionalism, but also the manner at which they operate shows that they're a very professional artillery unit. Hopefully, they do not get hit. That's one thing that I'm always scared about when watching Russian SPGs like this 2S1, is that they have a very short range compared to Western artillery systems like the M777, and so they are much more susceptible to counter battery fire just because they're going to be closer to the Russian lines than Western pieces will be. So I wish them the best of luck. Of course, an incredible display of, I guess you could say, gunmanship in this video. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the whole peon. I'm never get tired of seeing peons. The Ukrainians don't either, because they continue to make videos of these. But here in slow motion is a Ukrainian peon firing. And also, while it's of course very cool to watch the whole thing fire, notice the operator back here who fires the gun. This guy is hanging on for dear life. So here's the video. When you see him fire the piece, and this man is hanging on for dear life. And it gives you the idea of the power of a 203mm gun. You know, it must be something impressive if you're standing by one of those, and you just see it fire, and you're just an average person like me or you. I mean, like, golly. That would be incredible to actually witness. And hopefully hopefully the round is incredible in its accuracy and hits Russian targets further on down the line. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Ukrainian soldier explain why to have a laugh. A lot of people, of course, well, not really a lot, it's a small group of people who say, oh, you know, like, why do you laugh and why do you make jokes and stuff like that. And I'm gonna let it be explained by a Ukrainian soldier himself, who pretty much has the exact same reasons for why to laugh and why to make jokes that I do. So here's the video, and I'm glad I could get support from the Ukrainians on this and have someone explain how to get a laugh. And also, it's by none other than Odysseus from, well, yeah, Odysseus from the Odyssey by Homer. Look at this guy. He looks like he's a Greek. Anyways, here's the video.
Зрозуміло, чому військові часто такі веселі, чому вони знімають всі ці кумедні, духопідйомні відео, і взагалі, чому на війні так багато жартів і сміху. Та логіка, якою наступна. По-перше,
I hate to do this, y'all, but I'm going to have to mute this video because I just heard the copyrighted music, and YouTube is getting very, very serious to me about copyrights and stuff. They actually almost took one of my videos down a while ago, and so I'm going to have to mute this and actually just read over it, so that way I don't get in trouble again. So anyways, a lot of people can't understand why military men are so fun. And why do they shoot this funny motivational video? And so, why are there lots of jokes and laughs on the war? I hear the next logic. At first, if you'll be killed, you will not know about this. And there is no reason to worry about it. At second, if you'll be serious injured, you will faint in a minute. Your comrades need to care, but you also will be not worried about this. And third, if you will be slightly injured, you will leave the war and go for treatment alive. This is also good news. And fourthly, a laugh reduces stress and increases immunity. This is a natural painkiller, endorphin in case of lack of sex and alcohol. That helps to hold the line and be in a good mood. And you hold it too. So, of course, great inspirational words from the Ukrainian soldier there, and that's one of the reasons why I do crack jokes here and there watching this whole entire thing, is that while, of course, I won't be blown away or seriously injured or anything, it's still, of course, a little bit grueling to always try and watch this war and listen to the news, and I've been doing this for 104 days, so every once in a while you just want to crack a joke so that way it doesn't take a toll on you as much as it would if everything's always humdrum, gloom, and serious. So with that, we're moving on to our last bit of news for day 103, where you see a Stugna destroy a Russian tank. Everyone loves it. No one can get enough of it. And here we've got another example of a Stugna smacking a Russian tank into oblivion. Here's the video. We can see that the Stugna has been fired, and it's on its way. We now see the operator guide the missile downwards and hit the tank dead on. It appears that the turret went flying off to the back end, and it looks like the turret actually had the right mind. It's trying as much as it can to get closer to Russia than the rest of the tank. So it looks like it's even decided that it's time for it to leave Ukraine. With that, we've now covered all the day 103 news. We're now going to move on to the day 104 news, which we have about 12 bits of. Starting off, we can see another Stugna wipe out more Russian vehicles. Hopefully the video loads. Sometimes Reddit has a bit of a lag time uploading videos. But here we can see a Stugna engaging Russian soldiers. It does not go well for them, I'll tell you that. You can see the little group of Russians right there. Of course, in usual fashion, they never practice any kind of actual squad-level tactics of being spread out or anything. You can see that they're in a very big group, which is never smart. The Russians have never learned over 3.5 months of fighting now to space out, and we've been seeing this problem since the beginning of the war. In this video, we can finally see it get to them. We can hear the Stugna on its way. When you see it traveling towards the group of Russians that are unsuspecting of getting smacked by a Stugna. And you see they're just kind of wandering around. And it looks like a couple of them got flight miles there.
Ебать, нема никого там. Он пару человек. Все, нормально. Нормально, молодцы. В укрытие.
I mean, that's almost an entire squad that got wiped out right there for sure. That looks like at least 10 or 12 guys, and that Stugna hit them dead in the center. So I don't think that squad's going to be operating anymore, which is a little unfortunate for the Russians, but of course great news for the Ukrainians, as that lessens the number of active Russian troops in that specific part of the front lines. They literally just wiped out an entire squad that was, you know, of course, on the front, as you could see right there. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Luhansk People's Republic's tank. It looks like a T-64BV destroying a BMP-1. So here's the video. It looks like the Ukrainian BMP-1 had been abandoned. Unfortunately, I can't play the audio. It is copyrighted. We can see the T-64BV moving up. Now, the T-64BV is a little old, but it's not too old. I mean, like, it's kind of up to date. The reason why we don't see a lot of these things being used by the Russians, although we've seen a decent amount of them being used by the Ukrainians, is because these things were incredibly expensive to manufacture, expensive to maintain, and expensive to run. And so they actually replaced the T-64s in the Russian military with the T-72, which was a lot cheaper and easier to run. So we don't really see a lot of these. The Ukrainians use loads of them. I'm not really sure what the actual historical reason for that is, but they just have a readily available supply of T-64s, largely because they probably produced most of them. But here we can see the abandoned BMP-1 get hit by the, you know, LPR tank. I was at a loss for words there, but you can clearly see that it was abandoned. There's no crew bailing out. Obviously, there would be crew trying to bail out, and we could see the condition of the BMP beforehand was pretty much already derelict and abandoned, so the T-64 just hit this BMP just for the propaganda video. With that, that's the end of the clip, and of course you see the Russians trying to construct a narrative as usual, but of course it is a video from the war, and so I do try and show every single one of them. And this next bit, we can see a Georgian firefight. This was actually taken once again by a Georgian soldier in the volunteer Foreign Legion. And so we're about to see him get in a firefight. We're actually going to have to skip through this a little bit because I don't want the stream to go until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Давай.
We can hear a little bit of fire in the distance. This is actually the second day in a row, and we're actually going to skip forward by about a minute or so. This is the second day in a row we've gotten footage from the Georgians, which shows that they're in some heavy fighting, and they're also trying to show the world what they're actually doing and what the foreign legions that have been volunteering from all around the world are at. I mean, like, you know, of course they can't show the Americans and the British, they can only show the Georgians, but still they're showing that the Foreign Legion is actually fighting, and they're doing a very good job. Most of them are currently in Severodonetsk, as far as I know. We can now hear them laying down a pretty good bit of fire. It sounded like someone was firing semi-auto, but now someone's just unloading full auto, most likely a machine gun. You can also hear a massive amount of bullets bouncing off the ground and making a little, I guess you could say, screeching and whistling noises, which lets us know, unlike Russian videos, this is a legitimate firefight because they're actually taking return fire. We can still hear them laying them low, pretty rough. We can also see from the return fire, it seems, leaves being clipped off of the trees. If we back up for a second, you can actually see them right here. When the soldier takes his rifle down, you're about to see some leaves come down off the trees. Right there, you can see some. I'm actually going to let this video play in its entirety now, because while I only saw the first minute and 30 seconds when I put this on the news, this has got to be the heaviest firefight we've ever heard on film. I mean, like, there's never even a break in between the fire. It's just a constant stream of it from both sides. So we're going to let this video run because I'm very interested to see what the whole story is as it plays out. As we hear, the fire is continuing. We can now see him whipping out a grenade launcher. You can now see him moving over to the rest of the volunteers, running past them, and crawling through the fallen brush and trees that have been surrounding him. Most likely felled by artillery. You now see him crawling on the ground. Now he's picking up the grenade launcher again. We can now hear him firing the grenade launcher, but sadly we can't see where it's being fired to. We can still hear the firefight, of course, going on around him as he's trying to scream out some kind of request or an order. I'm not really sure which. We can now just see them firing into the distance. Now these guys can fight. There's no doubt about it. We can still hear the fire being laid on thick. You now see him grabbing for the grenade launcher again. And we can also see that they have a expended in-law over there that was on screen for a second. And that's the end of the video, but this has to be the most intense firefight we've ever heard on film. We have not seen anything close to this ever since the start of this war. And I have to give a credit to the Georgian Foreign Legion here for holding their cool under such withering fire and even laying down so much fire in return. I don't think either side was pinned down in this engagement. It seemed, due to the amount of rounds that they were flinging at each other the entire time, it was almost a straight-up melee in between the two sides, which is bizarre. Usually one side gets pinned down, at least historically that's what would happen. One side will get pinned down by withering fire and maybe pop off a few rounds, but both sides here were going at it, so I've got to give credit to the Georgian Legion for keeping their cool and not getting pinned down and continuing to fire back. And it sounded like, although we couldn't see much, they were in relatively good shape. We know that they must have been in pretty good shape because they've gotten out of there and actually posted the video, so we know that they didn't get wiped out or surrender, otherwise we would never be able to see this video. Also, one other thing is that if y'all could, I'm seeing a lot of Russian bots trying to make their way into this live chat. I've been seeing that myself here for a second. Of course, when the Russian bots come in, we know that the Russians are apparently not pleased with the progress of what's going on in Ukraine. And so if y'all would like to, of course, stick it to the bots, hit that like button because this helps this to reach more people. And let's bring more people in here to go ham on the Russian bots. So with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Russians miss the Ukrainians in an artillery barrage here in this video. Now, they tried to paint it like they hit them, but you can clearly see that they didn't. Here's some kind of infrared camera. It's in some kind of a blue scale, which is really weird. But you can see the Ukrainian soldiers here in this very low-lying tree line. It's almost a line of shrubs, but of course, that's an exaggeration. It is a tree line. And we can now see the shell hit, but what's interesting about it is that you can clearly tell that this shell is about 100 yards in front of that tree line. In fact, when the smoke clears, you can still see the Ukrainian soldiers back there laying down and actually moving a little bit. You could see one of them kind of moving around. And so I don't know what they're trying to paint here, but that's not a direct hit. And we could still see that the Ukrainians were back there relatively doing fine. Maybe one of them did get injured by shrapnel a little, but they tried to paint this as a direct hit. Of course, you can see by the caption, thermal view of shell landing near Ukrainian troops, unclear effect. But the Russians, of course, upload this like it's directly hitting them and taking them out, which, of course, we can see isn't the case, because once they actually zoom in, you can get a pretty good perspective of how far that shell was from the tree line. So with that, of course, unfortunate Russian failure of propaganda. I don't know why they can never just actually get a film of them doing something. The reason is because they never really are able to. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see footage from the VDV. Of course, everyone knows the great song from the VDV, you know, on parachute, Billy Bouquet. But it looks like after Hostomel, they kind of lost this grandeur image of being invincible when they got wiped out at the airport within the first few days. And so we can see them trying to recover their egos here by uploading some propaganda footage of them rolling around the countryside in a Tiger armored car. We can see the machine gun firing on top of the armored car, and we can now see them showing older footage from the Hostomel airport when they were actually trying to capture it. You can actually see the Miria airplane over there, and this tells you how old the footage is, but surprisingly, The Russians sent this out today to try and make the VDV look good, and they even took footage from a losing battle they had at Hostomel Airport when they were actually winning a small amount. But then, you know, everyone knows the story. They didn't manage to really hold the airport. They got pushed off, and then it took the Russian regular army to push the Ukrainians back out of Hostomel Airport and back towards Kyiv. You now see them, of course, clearing out the office buildings. And, of course, this is old footage, just in case anyone says that. Most, if not all of this, is very old footage. But we can, of course, see them trying to paint it like modern footage, or try and at least restore the VDV's image as an invincible fighting force, which we know is not the case. It's hilarious, honestly, to think that the Russians have to pretty much run an ad campaign for the VDV to try and make them look better than they are. We can now see them climbing onto what appears to be a BMP-1. And we can now see them showing a random artillery barrage and then driving down a street. We're not really sure where that street is, but that's the end of the video. And I just don't think they can recover the VDV's image from here forward. Everyone thinks of them as a joke. But the only thing good about the VDV, and I bet everyone can agree with this, is the song. I mean, like, they actually have a pretty decent song, but beyond that, they suck. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the VDV supposedly attacking the Ukrainians. This is apparently near Zaporizhia, and it's somewhat convincing, but I have some questions. But anyways, here's the video.
Готовимся встречать. Наблюдаю противника. Ждем. Пропустим чуть.
We can now see here the supposed Ukrainian squad and the Russians.
Контакт 11 шаг! Пошел вперед!
Now, I'm skeptical about this, and here's why. We don't see a whole squad here. They call this a squad, but these are 3 guys. Alright, and that's what throws a question in my head. The Ukrainians, of course, are going to operate their units like normal units. You're not just going to see 3 random guys just wandering around. It's going to be an entire squad, which could be around 9 to 12 guys. And so we don't see that. We only see 3 of them. And that's very odd to me. And on top of that, we don't see any, I guess you could say, point man who's well in front of the squad looking for things ahead. We don't see that either. All we see are 3 Ukrainians, supposedly, just walking through the brush. And that doesn't really seem like it's reasonable to me. It seems like that would be a breakaway from the normal Ukrainian formations, considering they are based off of Western doctrine. We do have a good size figure to go off of what a squad should be, and the Russians are trying to perpetrate that this 3-man group is a Ukrainian squad, which makes no sense.
Пошел вперед!
We can now see them moving forward very fast, like they're almost a SWAT team. We can now see them still running forward. In fact, in a second, they're about to run up on a Ukrainian soldier near this tree right over here where my mouse cursor is. And this is throwing up a lot of questions for me. Way too many questions. But still, we're going to let the video continue. We can now see the supposed Ukrainian back here near the bush. We can also see the 2 blurred out spots where the supposed other Ukrainians were. I just have too many questions about this video. It seems Farby.
На носилке его!
And so now we can see the Russian saviors, you know, of course I'm saying that sarcastically. Now we can see them saving the Ukrainian that's still left alive. I find this all really weird. And I mean, like, they almost did this in an instant. They didn't even wait for the guy to, like, say, I surrender or anything. They just run up on the guy and start setting up a stretcher. And it's, I don't know, it's just not adding up. At least in my opinion. Of course, y'all can think what y'all would like, and that's why I'm showing the video. But I'm not really into this. When you see a blue armband on him,
Давай.
but we don't see any armbands on these soldiers, and that's another questionable thing about this video, is that there's no white or red armbands that we can see visibly on any of the Russian soldiers.
Давай тут, там.
See no armbands on either arm, or legs, or anywhere.
Ногами вперед, да. Ногами вперед.
And we now see them wandering off, and I don't know. There's something off about this video. Of course, I'm showing it, but it just doesn't seem reasonable, I guess you could say. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Norwegian M109s come under fire. Now, this is something we could actually confirm. It would be too difficult for the Russians to try and find an M109 Paladin to mock something up like this. And of course, not everything the Russians show is fake. This appears to be real, but the questionability about whether this MLRS barrage actually caused serious damage to these M109s is another thing. So let's watch the video and let's see what we've got. So we can see the M109 here, and we'll also see that it's accompanied by an entire battery. We're about to see the MLRS barrage come in. And of course, when the barrage comes in, unlike Ukrainian videos where they zoom in, the Russian drone zooms out as far as possible. Now, they're going to zoom in. And we can see one burning M109. So we know that that one got hit directly. But the rest of them, on the other hand, didn't have any visible damage. It didn't look like the crews were bailing. And so it's questionable whether they were destroyed or damaged or whatnot. But we do know that the Ukrainians did lose one M109, which is unfortunate, but of course it is war. And we know for that one loss that the Ukrainians have taken, the Russians have taken about 8 or 7 or so, or 9. I'm not really sure what the actual figure in terms of losses to kills, because we don't have an updated figure for the Ukrainians. But for about every one loss that the Ukrainians are taking, the Russians are taking about 9 as of our last figure. So with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians hit a Russian BMP-2 at an incredibly close range. Now we can see why the in-law is able to pick up enough altitude to be able to hit a target about 60 feet or 20 meters away. Look how close they hit this BMP-2. The BMP-2 is literally right there on the edge of that tree line. And they've now hit it, and now they're running off. And now I have to mute the video, but you can see here the burned out BMP-2 that they just slammed. Wonderful to see, and it's always good to know that the Ukrainian forces are always managing to get the upper hand on the Russians. While, of course, they do take losses, we have seen an instance of that with the M109s. The Russians take a loss like this about every hour. So with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Mista S in operation. Now, this is a very interesting video. Of course, we've seen the Mista S's being blown up from here to Kingdom Come, but it's always, of course, of note to see how the Russians operate these artillery systems, so that way we can get a better idea of what's going on their end. So here's the video. We can now see the Mista apparently being set up. We can see that they've opened the side hatch on the turret. We can now see inside the Mista S. And while it has an ungodly sized turret, it looks like it's actually very cramped to operate in. It looks like they have almost no room to actually reload the piece with, which is a very interesting thing to note.
Один снаряд зарядить, высокоточный.
Трубка 97, заряд 3, один снаряд зарядить. 33.
We now see it fire, but let's see if we get any video from the inside of how fast this thing reloads. actually we don't. It cuts straight to a very grainy video where we can hardly make anything out, and it's now showing, supposedly, this mist of firing at Ukrainian forces. It looks like it may have, but the video footage is so grainy we can't tell whose vehicles those are. And we can't even assess what kind of damage is being caused. Of course, this is in typical Russian fashion. They never show us anything. And I think that's for a very good reason on their end. I see the Mista rolling out of there, and we're going to cut the video there because the rest of it's just the Mista driving off, and we didn't even get an idea of how fast the rate of fire is in this thing with the crew that was on the video. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we see the Ukrainians using a captured BMP. While we just saw the Ukrainians destroy a BMP-2, they've also captured a large amount of them, and here we can see that they painted one up in Ukrainian camouflage, and they've sent it straight back out to the front lines in service with the Ukrainian armed forces. Here's the video. Here we can see the BMP-2 rolling around. Of course, they're taking some pretty good videos of it. And the Ukrainians are incredibly proud of the captured vehicles. Obviously, they should be. And we can now see them firing the autocannon. The BMP's autocannon is decent, but it's not great. It's mostly for anti-infantry purposes, like most armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles cannons are for. If it actually wanted to take out vehicles, it would most likely have to be a BMP-2M or have a concourse installed onto it. With that, we're on to the last two bits of location unknown news, where we can see tractors in action again. The Ukrainian farmers have never been put out of this war. They're still in it, and we can see them dragging off a BTR here in this video. Would you believe it? 104 days in, the tractors are still running.
Теперь войска ТРО будут боронить техникой.
With that, that is the end of that video. But it's great to see that the Ukrainian farmers are still out there, and they're still nabbing a tank here and there. It looks like they did this on behalf of the army, but still, huge thanks to the Ukrainian farmers who've been doing their part in the war as well. With that, we're now going to move on to our last bit of location unknown news, where we can see a very interesting paint scheme from a video that was taken today of a Ukrainian aircraft. According to the caption, it's a MiG-29 carrying R-27s and R-73s, which are air-to-air missiles that are commonly used by MiG-29s. And it's in a paint scheme that's very similar to the Ukrainian Falcons. And just for y'all to know, the Ukrainian Falcons was an aerobatics display team. Here we can see it. And we can also see the livery that was on the aircraft right here. And apparently it's been outloaded with, loaded with missiles, and it's now sitting at a tarmac in Ukraine. So what they're assuming is that this MiG-29 may have been reactivated, and it still has this aerobatic livery. If so, if that is the case, whoever gets to fly this MiG-29 is probably going to have the best camouflage pattern. Well, not the best one, but the coolest one in the skies. So with that, that is the end of our location unknown news, and before we move on to the Kharkiv area and the northern Donbass, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat. So with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and it is now time for our question segment. So, first up, I want to recognize a whopping $200 donation from a channel regular, D. Shaw, who does not leave a comment, but thank you very much, D. Shaw, for that very generous donation.
And also, I have to thank you so much as well, D. Shaw. That kind of support helps out our channel a massive deal. And I've got to thank everyone so much who helps to support our channel and keep us running, because if it wasn't for our viewers helping us to keep running this thing, it wouldn't be possible. And so I thank you so much, D. Shaw, for the massive amount... D. Shaw, sorry. I know a lot of Sean's, but I thank you so much for the massive amount of support. It helps out our channel a lot, and I wish you had put in a question, but that's fine. I thank you so much for the support regardless, and it helps us out so much. And so thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have another very generous donation from another longtime channel viewer, Panama, who puts in a $100 donation and says, Enforcer, when do you think the Ukrainian forces will be able to cut off the Russian land bridge to Crimea?
Well, I thank you very much once again. Also, Panama, for the massive amount of support. Also helps our channel a huge amount. Just want you to know that. But to answer that question, the bridge, the land bridge, I think you're talking about the one from Rostov to Crimea. That's a tough one to answer, because while things are going well for the Ukrainians in terms of a defensive war, they aren't making any progress in counterattacks near the Zaporizhia area, and so I don't know if they would be able to cut off that land bridge for some while. And of course, I don't have. While of course, I'm usually right with my predictions. My predictions are usually 3 weeks out at best, and so they aren't really that far reaching into the future, and so it's usually very easy to predict what's going to happen soon. But with something like that could happen over the course of months, it's very hard to say if that would ever even be possible. So sadly, I hate to say it, but I couldn't really give you an answer, but like based off of facts or anything. But if I was to make a load of assumptions, I would assume that they'd be able to cut off the land bridge in at least under 4 months' time. And that's, of course, going off of a very ambiguous set of assumptions that I made inside of my head and a little bit of guesswork, because I just don't know what would happen in 4 months. Like, you know, like there could be multiple things to happen. Like, the West could, of course, stop providing support to Ukraine. They could provide even more support to Ukraine, and based off of one or the other, the whole entire war could go one direction or the other. So it's very hard to say what's going to happen, because I would have to be able to guesstimate what's going to happen in every other Western country that's providing support from here until that point. But I hope that that does answer the question at least. I think it would take about 4 months to cover that kind of ground, because at the thickest part of the front line, they would have to cover about 60 miles of ground, which is massive. And it won't be any small feat, to say the least. It'll actually be pretty gargantuan in its efforts. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you so much for the support, Panama. It helps out our channel a huge amount, and I hope that did answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the Kharkiv and northern Donbass news.
And the last one of this segment goes to Jay Bagwell, who puts in a $20 donation, and we have a pretty special announcement here. He says, "Happy 22nd birthday to my son, Wesley Bagwell, a political science student at Troy University. He is home for the summer, and we watch the streams together every single night. Both of us are proud members of the Leaf Spring Army." And first off, Jay, happy birthday to your son, Wesley. I hope you're having a great birthday. And also, thank you very much for both of you for watching the channel for such a long time.
And I also want to say as well, happy birthday to Wesley. Of course, just a surprise for everyone. Hopefully they don't mind too much, because I actually met these guys in person. So if any of y'all are wondering, what does the enforcer look like? They know, but they actually swore an oath of secrecy that they'd never say who I was. But it was really cool to meet them, because they were actually the first fans I've ever met in person. And actually, at this point, they're the only fans I've met in person that I didn't know from the start. So it was super cool. It was a really cool encounter, and so I thank you so much for the support, of course, and I also wish Wesley a happy birthday. If y'all are watching right now and not at a restroom break or getting popcorn or something in the question segment, thank you so much for meeting me in person. Y'all were incredibly nice, and it was, of course, really cool to meet fans. And also, I do wish you the best happy birthday possible, and I hope this is icing on the cake if possible. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, D. Shaw. It, of course, helps out this channel greatly, as you know, and I wish that y'all have the best birthdays possible. Well, really, the day's winding out here in Alabama, so I hope y'all have had a fun birthday so far over the course of the day and done a lot of fun stuff. And so with that, we've now reached the end of this question segment. Of course, thank everyone for their support. If you have sent in a super chat tonight and it hasn't been answered, do not fret. We do get to every single one of them before the end of the night. And so with that, we're now going to return to the news in Kharkiv and the northern Donbass. And so with that, let's get to it. Starting off in Kharkiv, we've gotten no news today. Of course, there's been no reports. The reports have been getting thinner and thinner as time has gone on, and it appears that over the past 2 days, there's been a complete stall at this front line, and everything's become static, even on the Ukrainian side. I believe this may be because both sides are focusing most of their efforts in the Severodonetsk and Popasna area. Of course, this is a great relief to the Ukrainians, as they don't have to, of course, supply a large amount of their forces across the front lines with the supplies that they used to be consuming, because there's no action occurring really anywhere anymore. But in the Severodonetsk and Popasna area, that's a different story. So right now, we actually have nothing to report in Kharkiv. Last we heard, which I believe the situation has now changed because of the lack of news, the Ukrainians were exerting Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting really messed up there. But the Ukrainians were, of course, exerting pressure on this little echelon here, well, salient. I'm really getting messed up here with the wordage. Sorry, y'all. For some reason, I'm just all over the place with the wordage tonight. But as of late, it seems like there's been no news coming out, and so I believe that front line has fallen static, and the Ukrainians may consider it a very low risk to the city of Kharkiv, which is just about 15 miles away from the front lines. We also have nothing to report in the Chuhiv area, and also the Balaklia area. So by and large, the entire, I guess you could say, northern part of this eastern front line that's now been created near the Donbass region has fallen completely silent. Neither side is really committing a large amount of activity anywhere. And I think that's showing that the Russians have completely lost the initiative and the ability to continue on any kind of activities to any degree of a large scale. One has to remember that at the start of this war, they were running offensives around the entirety of the country, from Kyiv all the way to Kherson on the other side of the country, across the entirety of the border. And as the war has gone on further and further, we've seen their offensive actions keep on getting limited to smaller and smaller spaces. Now we're seeing that the only area they're committing offensive actions, and they're hardly offensive actions anymore, is in the Severodonetsk area. And even at that, they're getting held back, and they've also been pushed back a little bit by the Ukrainians, although it seems like the news is starting to shift in another direction today. And so with that, we're now going to move on down into the Izium area, where we have gotten a small amount of news. Of course, there's been no action in the Izium area either, which of course is showing that the Russians have lacked the initiative to continue on multiple offensives at the same time, and they're only able to really focus on one. But here in this actual picture, we can see a massive crater in the small village of Dovhike, which is actually a little bit close to the front lines, and it appears that the Russians obliterated the small village with a large explosive. We're not really sure what kind of explosive would have caused a crater like that, but you can see that it's wiped out this entire area. And the crater, if I was able to give a guesstimation of size, if that's a car right here, I'd assume that this thing is probably several hundred feet wide. So this has got to be one of the largest craters we've seen during this war. I don't know what caused it, but the damage is, of course, significant. You can see that almost every single building in this area has also been leveled as well, and the surrounding areas have been pot-marked with what appears to be MLRS fire. And so with that, we're going to move on past the village of Dovhike. We don't know what kind of damage that's caused to the village. If we zoom in here, you can actually see that the village is only about the size we saw in the picture. But with that, we're now going to move further down towards the Lyman area, where action is still continuing. It appears that the Russians have been completely stalled south of Lyman by a very stout Ukrainian defensive position. Of course, they're on a hill line, which gives them the height advantage, and they're able to look down on the Russian forces and shoot at them from the hilltops. We can see today that the Russians have become casualties of their own carelessness in this area, as a wounded Russian soldier was lying on a road. Other Russians came forward to try and pick him up, and then they ended up becoming casualties themselves. Here's the video. We can see them trying to get the wounded man up off the road and get him back to the BTR, and then the BTR gets hit immediately by an artillery shell and destroyed, leaving the Russians all wounded, some of them dead. As you can see, some of them are probably living their last moments there, since the artillery hit them nearly dead on, and we can see this guy can't even get off the BTR. And it doesn't look like this wounded evacuation process has gone well for him. It appears, as a matter of fact, they've resulted in getting more wounded people than they attempted saving. I guess you could say that's a small bit of karma there for what they've done to the Ukrainians, but still, honestly, it's just kind of fitting for them at this point that something like that would happen. But anyways, of course, nothing's really happening at Lyman anymore. The Ukrainian defenses are holding the Russians back, and so in that degree, their offensive has completely stalled. Moving on into the Severodonetsk area, we have been getting a little bit of a change of news from here. While the Ukrainians were pushing the Russians out of the city, I did say that my initial thoughts was that the Ukrainians would believe that Severodonetsk, being in a mostly flat area, would be an indefensible position that doesn't really have much of an advantage because it's on the eastern side of the Severodonetsk River, and so it of course has that massive obstacle dividing it from the rest of the Ukrainian front. So my original assumption was that the Ukrainians would abandon Severodonetsk and reform defensive positions on the ridge line near Lysychansk that also borders the river, because that is incredibly strong. The Russians would have to fjord a river and then assault a hill to be able to make any kind of ground heading into Lysychansk, which would be next to impossible for them. And while the Ukrainians were making progress initially, we have heard a little bit of news today that it appears that the Ukrainians are now retreating out of the town, and that whole entire action that they did there may have been to buy enough time to get most of their forces across the river, and then they're going to allow this pocket to close on its own and reform their defensive positions along the river. So with that, starting off on day 103, and then moving on to our dark gray dots from day 104, we can see that there was a firefight in Severodonetsk on day 103 again. Apparently this was filmed by the Spetsnaz. Of course, since it's Spetsnaz, take it with a grain of salt. But here's the video.
Да, отходим, Барс, отходим, Барс! Черный! Держу! Готов! Барс, отходи, отходи, отходи!
It's always questionable, you see, because the thing is that whenever we see Ukrainian firefight footage, we always hear bullets skipping off the ground, being fired at them. You know, like in the Georgian video, it was hell on earth. It was a literal just bloodbath of fire fired at each other. But in this video, it only sounds like the Russians are firing at something in the distance, and that's it.
Держу, держу, держу. Пошел, Барс, Барс! Барс!
Also, let's notice that while this is a firefight from the brave Spetsnaz, we don't see them holding their ground. We in fact see them losing the ground and actually running away from the firefight and further back down the small trail they're on.
Держу! Отходим, пацаны! Отход! Да!
That's the end of the video, but of course at the very end, we could of course see the brave Spetsnaz still running down the street, well, running down the small trail and trying to get away from the supposed Ukrainians in the video. So a very good message to send in a propaganda video that you're trying to upload to show how brave the Russians are, is that even in a firefight, they're always backing up and leaving the area. So with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of news from the Severodonetsk area, where we can see the Georgian Legion arrived, the ones we saw in the video and the location unknown videos, just the other day, just yesterday, actually. And so here's the video of them arriving in the area. They're pretty grouped up. Of course, that's always concerning. But you can't really complain too much because that firefight they were in later on showed that they were well put together, so... And of course, when you see them joking around and playing, of course, the high spirits that all of the Ukrainian military has. And that's the end of the video. But with that video, we know that the Georgian Legion had arrived in Severodonetsk. Moving on to the next clip, we can actually see that more BMPs were destroyed near the Severodonetsk area. And I'm assuming that this is near Severodonetsk, considering that it's the only place of heavy fighting, but we don't actually have official confirmation on that. We can, of course, see the spare parts lying around the ground. You know, O'Reilly Auto Parts would be seething to see this kind of stuff all over the place. I mean, they could honestly make a pretty good buck off of all the spare parts that are lying around in the ground.
267 дверца, котелок, на котором написано РВ.
We now see the burnout rear of the BMP-3. We can also see some pieces of track, and we can see that one of the it apparently got detracked before it exploded. This is the track, of course, is behind the vehicle.
Маленький танк, очень мощный. Россияне всю свою промышленность направляют только на создание оружия для убийства. У них мозгов ни на что больше не хватает. Поэтому сюда они вложили всю мощь своего российского разума. Бронежилет.
That appears to be a canteen, but I'm not really sure.
Всей площади.
No, that's not a canteen for certain. Sorry, got that wrong.
Снаряд с БМП.
You see a 100mm shell used for the main gun. Now they're wandering further down the street. We're actually going to skip forward a little bit to the BMP again.
Да-да-да, я зрозумів. Я зрозумів.
And this is actually another destroyed BMP. We can see that the turret in this one has actually gotten a little depressed and has decided to go inside the tank. I don't think this one's salvageable.
Консервы российские. Не понадобились консервы.
And that's the end of the video, but of course it's wonderful to see that the Ukrainians have managed to knock out 2 more BMP-3s near the Severodonetsk area. At least we're assuming that. It seems like that would be a reasonable assumption, but it could be wrong, so the marker could be elsewhere here on the Eastern Front. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can actually see Ukrainian armored cars patrolling the streets of Severodonetsk, but while that is in mind, we do have to remember that apparently the Ukrainians are retreating out of the city today. Withdrawing, actually, would be a more proper term to the defensive positions across the river, at least from what we've been told. That might be wrong. We might find out different tomorrow, but we can see here these armored cars patrolling the streets. We can also see some destroyed vehicles here and there. And that's the end of the video. But we could see that the presence of the Ukrainians in Severodonetsk was nearly uncontested in that video. We're now going to move down to our two last bits of day 103 news before we move on to the dark gray day 104 pieces of news that we've gotten, which is very low here in the Severodonetsk area. But we can see here that the Ukrainians took some LPR, prisoners of war. For those of y'all who don't know what the LPR is, which is also called the LNR, as to Luhansk People's Republic, and here we can see a load of them being taken prisoner here within the city of Severodonetsk on day 103. That's the end of the video, but it's great to see that the Ukrainians were making enough headway on day 103 to actually overrun and capture LPR soldiers. So, of course, incredible to see, and we did know, based off of that evidence, and also the evidence of the armored cars moving around and how the firefights were unfolding, that the Ukrainians were still making progress as of day 103 in the city. That may have changed today, but I still don't have enough information to confirm that, although that's largely what people have been saying. Moving on from that, we can see Russian helicopters being used near the Severodonetsk area here in this clip. So I'm going to mute this real quick and play it. We can now see the helicopter tilting upwards and firing off its rockets in typical fashion, and now trying to hit the ground as fast as possible. We can now see the next helicopter firing off its salvo of rockets, and also popping flares, trying to hit the deck as fast as possible. It looks like it may be an Mi-24 or an Mi-35. That's the end of that clip, and now we're going to be moving on to our day 104 news, which is just today. In the city of Severodonetsk, we saw that the Georgians were under some kind of fire. It sounded like it may have largely been artillery fire, but here's the video, and let's see what we can find out from it. We can hear the shells flying in as the Georgians take a little bit of cover. We can now hear a firefight breaking out in the distance. We can now hear the artillery landing even closer to them this time, but it appears that they are in some kind of concrete bunker. You see that they're still inside the bunker, and the artillery fire is landing right outside, probably just within 100 yards or so. That's the end of the video, but we could, of course, see that the Georgian Legion, of course, was hunkering down while the artillery barrage came in. And while I would say that this guy does seem a little bit shaken by the artillery barrage in this video, one has to remember that he may have been one of the guys in the firefight just in the location unknown videos that came out today. And so you know, obviously these guys are incredibly brave. We've already gotten video evidence to show that and show how calm and collected they are under fire. And so I have to give a large credit to the Georgian volunteers. They were the first Foreign Legion group, I guess you could say the group of foreign volunteers, that went over to Ukraine at the start of this war, and they've been there ever since. So massive amount of credit to the Georgian volunteers. Them and Ukraine have pretty much been the friends ever since the beginning of this conflict. With that, we're now going to move on to the other bit of Day 104 news that we've gotten in the Severodonetsk area, where we can see the Freedom of Russia Legion in battle. That's right, not only is the Georgian Foreign Legion there, and almost every other contingent of Foreign Legion soldiers, we've also seen the Freedom of Russia Legion fighting in the battle for Severodonetsk. Here's the video. Of course, when you hear the fire coming in typical fashion, of course, unlike a Russian video, you always hear enemy fire coming in. We could hear the little whistle and ricochet of bullets off the ground. Now you now see this soldier firing back.
О, братан!
Now right there, we're going to revisit that part. We can actually see that some kind of bomb. I'm not going to say what kind. It could have been a mortar round, a grenade. We're going to call it a bomb. A bomb landed near this guy and exploded, and it looks like it may have lifted him up off of his feet and down onto the ground. And of course, we could hear him yell out. So here's that replay of that again.
О, блядь! О, братан! О!
Not really sure if he's okay. I do hope that he's in the best of health. But of course, this is an unfortunate side of war, is that casualties will, of course, be incurred. But I hope that he knows that he is fighting for the right side. Of course, he is a Russian who's volunteered to fight for the Ukrainians, which does make him a traitor to his own country, but I guess you could say a savior of the Western world, and of course, Ukraine itself. And so, hopefully he's alright, and if he is injured, hopefully it's just a minor injury, and he can recover incredibly fast. So, best of luck to that guy, and I have to give credit to the Russian Legion, because out of everyone, they were incredibly brave just to stand up against their government and actually fight against the military of Russia. So with that, we're now going to move out of the Severodonetsk area. Of course, I've said that the Ukrainians are withdrawing from the city as far as we've heard today, but we're going to be waiting over the next several days to see if that is true. If it is, it falls in line with my first assumption, is that the Ukrainians are going to try and assume defensive positions all along the Severodonetsk River and abandon pretty much everything on the eastern side, so that way they'll pretty much have an impregnable fortress of, I guess you could say, defenses across the river, which will make it almost impossible for the Russians to cross, and the whole entire front line will most likely go static. The second idea is that the Ukrainians may not be withdrawing from the town, and that may just be talk that's going around today. They may try and hold on to the town as long as possible just to eat up Russian resources. But with that, we're now going to move back into the Lysychansk, where, y'all are not going to believe this, this is something I couldn't believe. Zelensky visited Lysychansk. Not only did he go to Zaporizhia, which was very close to the front lines to me, he actually visited Lysychansk, which is only about 5 miles from the nearest front line. And so here's the video of Zelensky, of course, reviewing the forces and all that sort of stuff in Lysychansk itself. I can't believe that he actually went here, but this was insane. So here's the video. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any audio, but here we can see Zelensky reviewing information with a Ukrainian officer, I'm assuming, over a map.
найголовніше зброї не хочеться втручати. Саме захищаєте нашу державу в найскладнішій ситуації. Сьогодні знаходимося.
Here you see him offering an award, some kind of citation to some soldiers.
Разом прибув.
Дякую, пане капітане, за службу. Дякую за службу.
Спасибо.
Now, here's a great question. How come we've never seen Putin do anything like this? We've never seen him arrive in, say, the outskirts of Kharkiv or Kherson or Melitopol to hand out awards or citations to any of the Russian soldiers. How come we see that Zelensky is traveling around all over the country at this point, reviewing forces, of course, handing out awards and citations to all of the brave soldiers and defenders of the country, but we don't see Putin doing that, or even any Russian generals for that matter, as far as we know. The closest that Putin has actually gotten to any soldiers during the entirety of this war was at a military hospital in St. Petersburg, which is as far away from the front lines as possible. So you have to give, of course, massive credit to Zelensky for putting his neck out on the line here to, of course, visit the troops and keep their morale high and letting them know that he has great confidence in them and their abilities because he's traveling this close to the front lines and putting himself in that much danger because he believes in what Ukraine can do. And so I've got to say nothing but respect for Zelensky again for doing those kinds of things. So we're now going to move even further behind the line where we could see firing right over his head today. The Ukrainians, of course, were firing more MLRS barrages at the Russian positions in the area. So here's the video. Of course, I have to keep it muted, but we can see two BM-21 Grads or Tornado MLRSs that are preparing to fire, and now you can see them going to work. You see the rockets, of course, flying off into the distance. Sadly, GTA music is playing in the copyrighted version. But if you do want to hear the music and, of course, see this clip for yourself, there is a link in the description below to the map. It's up to date, and it shows you every single marker I have on this one on stream. And also, if you would like to join the Discord and join our community of the Lee Spring Army, there is a link in the description below for that as well, so that way you can join and get up there with the rest of the Lee Springers. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, which we've gotten from the area around Kherson. Around Kherson, we saw some Ukrainian helicopters flying incredibly low to the ground. I am very sorry if I'm messing up a lot of my wordage tonight. I'm going to be honest, I am a little bit tired. For some reason, I've had massive headaches today, and it's drained me of energy, but the streams never stop, and so the news will never stop until it's done. And so here's a video of the Ukrainian helicopters flying low over the ryegrass. Of course, we can see them almost on the ryegrass. It's almost like they're rolling on the ground. And of course, it's great to see that the Ukrainian helicopter forces, while not as up to date as the Russians, you know, of course, they largely use Mi-24s and Mi-17s and Mi-8s, they are still putting them to good work and trying to do the best they can with them. So, of course, incredible to see, and it's good to know that the Ukrainian helicopter forces are still operational. Moving on down towards the Popasna finger, which we've gotten a small amount of news from today, we can see on day 103, the Ukrainians were firing mortars in this area towards the Russians. Here's some pictures of that. We can see the heavy mortar, well, not heavy mortar, I call this more like a medium mortar, firing at the Russians. We can see another picture of them hanging the round down the barrel, and then firing it again. And so, of course, wonderful to know that the infantry do have mortars and that they are using them, hopefully, to great effect. Moving on down towards the area of Popasna, we also got some pictures on the same day of the LPR near the city of Popasna using their own D-20 howitzers against the Ukrainians. Here we can see some pictures of that. We can also see them preparing some shells to go into the D-20. And then we can finally see them loading them and firing them in the D-20. Hopefully these were well off. We know that the LPR has most likely not have the ability to train their soldiers as much as the Ukrainians. And most of them, of course, are conscripts, which lowers the amount of experience, training, and effectiveness as well. With that, we're now going to move on to the next little bit of news, and these two are actually from day 104. Here on the front lines themselves near Tripolia, we've seen a drone dropping munitions. Of course, this was the 24th Mechanized Brigade dropping some bombs on a Russian trench. Here's the video, and it looks like the Russians didn't really do all too well here. We can actually see one Russian looking straight up at the drone and trying to fire at it, but it appears that it's too late. He freaks out and gets up and tries to run, but then we can see him run straight into the grenade. So it looks like he actually did himself a bad favor there, and he may have ended his life early in an attempt to try and save it. We can now see that he's fallen to the ground, and it appears that he was most likely mortally wounded. The other soldier that was in that trench has just fallen over, so I'm assuming that he's most likely dead. So that, of course, drone did a decent amount of work on those Russian units. Of course, while only taking out about 2 of them, it is a massive loss of morale for these Russians in this area, considering that there was almost no possible way for them to shoot that drone down, and they're pretty much helpless against them. With that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news from the T-1302 highway, where we can see the Ukrainians, of course, using the M777 as much as possible and trying to hit the Russian units in the distance. So here's a video of the venerable and highly honored American/British artillery piece, the M777.
Кожен свою частину вносить в війну. Кожен свою. Війна – це не автомат в руках. Війна починається з голови у кожного з нас. Тому наразі воює вся Україна.
Now we got copyrighted music flaring up, and so we're going to have to mute it. But we can see them, of course, preparing to fire the piece. The M777 is a really cool looking howitzer, and we can now see them firing it. And golly, look at the recoil on that thing. Look how far it skid back. It was like a solid 6 feet that it covered in a second. And now we can see something blowing up downrange. I'm not sure if that's a video of what it hit, but we can see a turret getting some flight miles there. So, of course, Delta will... I'm not going to make a joke about that. I don't know if Delta would have a problem with that. But an airline company out there somewhere, we're going to call it Belta, is going to certainly give that Russian tank crew some flight miles because they are trying out a new space program called T-72 Cosmos. With that, we're now going to be moving on from the northern Donbass into the southern Donbass. But before we actually get down there and cover the southern Donbass news, the southern front news, and the news from the rest of the country, and also the speech from Zelensky, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then after we do that, we'll of course return right back to the news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so moving back into the questions, we have a $50 super chat from Sleeping Piranha, who says, the Russian stands over in Russia today seem to be denying truce more and more. I think they are having to inhale more copium to retain their convictions. One had first denied Russia lost ships and then claimed it was an accident. I'm not venting, you are.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And yes, I do have to agree that that is something that we've been seeing, is that the Russians are always trying to come up with new ways to cope with the situation. They started off the war saying it's going to be a few days and they'll win, and then they said, well, it wasn't really the Russian plan to win immediately. It was our plan to drag this thing out and destroy our economy in the process. And then we've seen them now saying, oh, all of this has all gone perfectly to plan. Even losing the Moskva was to plan. We didn't want that ship anyways. It was old and it was dated. It's not like we made the flagship for literally no reason rather than it was one of our best ships. So we have seen them coping a lot, and I would have to agree that they are starting to do that more and more, and that is, of course, because the war keeps on dragging on, which is something that the Russians did not expect and they didn't plan for. And we can tell, certainly, because they kept on, I guess you could say, resizing their war goals from the entirety of the country to part of the country, now to just a single city nearly. So I hope that does address the comment, and I do have to entirely agree that it appears that they are coping harder than normal, and especially as the war continues to go on. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the question, well, really the comment. But with that, thank you once again. It helps out our channel to keep running, and is always greatly appreciated. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we now have a $50 donation from AJS9437, who says, I've been watching since day 41, and this is my first time super chatting. I don't have any questions that I couldn't answer myself, but one I wonder about is if you are still playing War Thunder. I have nearly 3,000 hours and have been boycotting WT since the invasion started, 07.
Well, thank you very much for the support, AJS. And to answer that question, yes, I still do play War Thunder. Some people have been laboring under a misconception about War Thunder that they are a Russian company, when in fact they're actually Hungarian, but they have a branch office in St. Petersburg, Russia. So I actually boycotted War Thunder for about the first week or two until I heard from a friend that they actually were not headquartered in Russia. They were headquartered in Hungary the entire time. And so I pulled that out and pulled that up, and it turns out it's actually true. They're a Hungarian gaming company that has a branch in Russia. Russians are actually known in the gaming world for creating some of the most realistic games out there. If you ever think of a realistic military game, or really a very popular war game that's not like Call of Duty or Battlefield, those games would be World of Tanks, War Thunder, and Escape from Tarkov, which have, well, really War Thunder the least out of all of them. But World of Tanks is actually a Russian company. Wargaming Net is actually based in Russia. We also see that, let me think, Escape from Tarkov is an entirely Russian company. So I have been boycotting Tarkov because I used to play that, but now that Russia's gone to war, I don't play that game whatsoever, although they still got my money before the war. But War Thunder, on the other hand, is actually Hungarian, so I still play that game, and I think it's a really good game, honestly. So with that, I hope that answers the question, and I hope that also explains why no one really should be boycotting War Thunder, because it is a Hungarian game, and just because they had Russian game developers, you would have to go after everyone on Earth pretty much on YouTube, because a lot of animators and such things for most YouTube channels did come from Russia. So with that, I hope that does address the question. I hope that you do play War Thunder soon again. It's really fun, and they're also going to be putting the F-14 in game really soon, so that'll be a lot of fun for a lot of people. And so with that, I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're going to go on to the last question of this section, and then we're going to move back on to the rest of the news for the night. And so with that, what is the final question of this segment?
And the last one of this segment goes to John Boyer, who is a longtime channel supporter and viewer who puts in a $50 super chat. And he says, question, what is your take on the Russian army morale and will to fight? Bravo Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, Slava President Zelensky, and Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, William. Of course, it's always greatly appreciated, and it helps out our channel a huge amount. Also, you've been a return supporter, and it's always wonderful to know that a lot of people always want to see us keep on running and keep on succeeding at what we do. College has started back up for me, just for everyone to know, and so that is why I've changed my upload schedule for the shorts to later on in the day, so now they're closer to the stream, so that way I can have a larger block of uninterrupted time in the middle of the day to focus on everything I need to do, like errands, college, and stuff like that, because doing them in the middle of the day was great, but at the same time, it really limited me, because my free time to do stuff with was divided in two. And so I couldn't really get anything done, because I would have to, of course, drive home from whatever I was doing, sit down for about an hour and a half and pump one of those things out, and then drive however much longer to get out and keep on doing stuff. And also that was the same thing with ever doing like errands or taking care of stuff around the house, so that I'd have to stop and sit down here, and then I have to start back over. So I've actually changed that so that way I can try and work college a little bit better. Also, to address that question, which is a pretty good one, Russian morale, as far as we can tell, and of course morale is kind of an ambiguous thing, but you can always tell by the body language of people in these videos, and we never really see the Russians having a lot of fun. While we of course see them engaging in firefights, they're never really joking around or having a laugh or anything like that, which tells you that they're mentally going through hell, and apparently they're in very low spirits. Otherwise they'd be like the Ukrainians, where in every video we see them joking around and having a good laugh, and that's because they're actually doing very well in their minds, and they actually are in real life, and so they can keep up these high spirits, but the Russians are not. And so based off of that, their morale is incredibly low, and their will to fight is very low as well, because we can see even when they divert the entirety of their resources into a very small offensive like the one around Severodonetsk, the Russian forces just do not have the carry-through to keep on fighting or fight well. That may be because of a lack of training as well, which will lead to a lack of morale, and then that leads to a lack of fighting ability. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, William, and I thank you once again so much for the support. And I also want to thank AJS, and also, who was the first super chat we covered in this section, Matthew?
Let's see. The first one was from Sleeping Piranha, I believe.
And I also want to thank Sleeping Piranha. Sorry I forgot the name, but I want to thank all of y'all so much for the support in this little question segment. Of course, the support helps out our channel a massive amount, and we're always so appreciative to everyone who wants to keep the channel running, because this is the only way we run. And I want to say this again, because I was actually watching some YouTube videos today from other channels that cover historical stuff. Not necessarily Ukraine stuff, but historical stuff, which I kind of consider this channel to kind of be in that category. And it was just ad after ad and ads in the middle of ads and ads on top of ads, and I couldn't stand it. It drives me insane, and I know and I hope it's a reprieve to a lot of viewers to come on my channel, and there are never ads, unless if, of course, it was taken over in a copyright claim. There are never any ads on any of my videos. You hop on and you just watch the stuff. And I hope that a lot of people do enjoy that, and I hope a lot of people find that worthy enough to support our channel, because it's only through the support of our viewers that it can keep on running, because we don't make any money off of AdSense. So with that, I thank you all so much once again for the support. If you have sent in a super chat tonight, do not worry. We will get to all of them before the end of the night. So do not fret whatsoever. We will get to it. And so with that, well, actually, let me clarify that. We'll get to all of the live chats. Well, no, not live chats. Super chats. And then we will cover some live chat questions. Not all of them, because we get like 10,000 of them a night. But we will cover a few. And so with that, we're now going to move down into the southern Donbass and the rest of the news. And starting off near the area of Severodonetsk, today we've seen Ukrainian forces once again under shelling. The Russians, of course, bombarded the unit and came very close to hitting it. But as usual, Russian accuracy is not as good as Ukrainian accuracy. And so luckily for these Ukrainians, it was a near miss. Here's the video. We see that near miss right down the road. When you see the soldier, of course, just moving around a little bit in the reeds, and it appears that they all got out of it okay. Of course they did, because they uploaded the video, so we know that they got out of it unscathed. So luckily for them, the Russian artillery isn't as good as the Ukrainians. And with that, we're now going to move even further on down the front towards the area of Donetsk. We didn't actually get any news today at all from Donetsk. All the news we got from this area was from day 103, some 48 hours ago. Starting off, we saw a Ka-52 firing off its rockets over the village of Yasnuvata. I believe I pronounced that right, which is on the very edge of Donetsk city. Here we see the helicopter flying over the suburbs. And then, of course, we'll see it do its typical upwards tilt and then fire off its rockets here in the distance. We can see one of the helicopters flying low over the houses, trying to get away from the front. Actually, correction, that apparently was the same helicopter we saw earlier. It's now spun around and fired off its rockets towards the Ukrainians, and now we can see it spinning back around and hitting the deck, and it appears that's now flying towards the cameraman. With that, that is the end of the video. Also, notice Townsend's there. I actually watched their channel a little bit today. But with that, we're now going to be moving on to some news from the other side of the front, where we can see the Ukrainians once again using an M777, but this time in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainians really do love the M777s. We saw a lot of videos of Ukrainian artillery in operation before the M777s arrived, but now that the M777s have arrived in Ukraine, almost half of the artillery videos we get are of M777s. But anyways, here's the video. That guy dropped that shell like a dead fish. Look at this. I don't know how safe that is, but it was like he didn't really care. He was like, here.
Вчилося всього 5 днів, цього було більш ніж достатньо. Всі ці нюанси, що касалися, вже більше в роботі розбиралися по ходу. Нічого абсолютно важкого немає, якщо можна сказати так. Навіть, можливо, трохи простіше, упрощена така програма була. Навіть самі інструктори, що нас навчали, дивувалися, як ми все на ходу схоплюємо, швидко навчаємося.
We now see them aiming the piece.
Зараз на моєму фоні
Постріл!
українська артилерія наносить вогневе ураження по цілях з реактивно-активних снарядів із гаубиці М777, яка надійшла із Сполучених Штатів Америки на озброєння українським військовим.
Постріл!
It seems like this crew is going a little bit slow, but of course it's a Western piece. They weren't trained on this in their initial contract and in their initial training, and so it is, of course, a little excusable that they are slow. This is a very new piece for them. We now see the piece firing again.
Це, напевно, в першу чергу піднімає бойовий дух, що самих нас, як артилеристів, що піхоту, якщо вони десь побачать, що йде прикриття саме з них. Тобто це відчувається така, знаєте, свого роду допомога партнерів, які так чи інакше нам допомагають. І помимо того, що ще є наші радянські системи, які так само з нами тут знаходяться, працюють, вони вже бачать щось новеньке, яке ми швидко опановуємо і доволі, скажімо, влучно стріляємо, тому неодноразово отримували навіть слова вдячності від піхотинців. Тому воно змінює, да. На жаль, ще не в такій достатній кількості, щоб ми могли працювати більш, так скажемо, ефективніше і більше відправляти, скажімо так, подаруночків нашим ворогам. Не знаю, напевно, все-таки те, що більшість з нас розуміє, що, по-перше, не ми починали цю війну, те, що вони прийшли на нашу землю і наробили досить багато великої біди, майже кожен з нас відчув це на собі, оскільки що рідних повтрачали, деякі що бойових побратимів. І в якійсь мірі це є свого роду така ще злість на те, що не варто було цього робити. Інколи навіть буває важко, так опускаються руки, така інтенсивність, що не відпочити, не якось, не знаю, там нормально не погарчуватися, але ти кожного ранку просинаєшся і в тебе це все в голові, і ти розумієш, що це потрібно робити. І оця така жага, чим пошвидше це все завершити, чим пошвидше отримати цю перемогу, яку дуже багато людей чекають не лише в Україні. І повернутися, власне, до своїх домівок вже на, так би мовити, заслужений відпочинок.
We can also see a Canadian volunteer here. We can see the little patch on his arm. And that's the end of the video. Also, something interesting for me to consider, a little bit of a correlation, but of course correlation does not equal causation. There is a Canadian volunteer on that piece, and Ukrainians have operated M777s for a decent while now, and so maybe that volunteer is with that piece because he actually has experience with it and he can guide the crew through some of the basics of operating it. That's something I have been thinking about. And also, I saw a really interesting question in the live chat that I'd like to answer real quick before we move on down towards Mariupol. And someone asked, and this isn't going to be getting political or anything, because this is something that neither party A or B has covered in any country, I believe. But Shine W says, when you were elected president of the USA, will you sign a bill to outlaw ads? And my answer to that question is I want to outlaw ads of a certain kind, and they're pharmaceutical ads. For example, like, of course you've seen them, the one where it's like, I love you tomorrow. Or the ones, where they sit there and make it look like everyone's happy and dancing. They're like, side effects include death, blood, bleeding, all that sort of stuff. I wish those would be outlawed because I don't really think that that is portraying the drug correctly. I believe that it should be advertised directly to doctors, hospitals, and such things like that instead of the patients, because the patients don't have enough medical experience to actually understand if that drug is good or bad, while a doctor may have an idea of whether that is good or not. So that's actually something that I would like to outlaw ad-wise, because I feel like it's a little unethical for a drug company to try and market their drugs directly to a patient that just sees an ad and sees happy, smiling people in it and really knows nothing about the chemical compositions of these drugs. But with that, I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit. Hopefully you didn't get too political. I don't think either political party here in the U.S. covers that. And of course, I don't touch political topics that the political parties covering. I also don't draw opinions on that. And so we're now going to be moving down into Mariupol, where we can actually see that the Russians turned the water back on in Mariupol. But what's interesting to me is that the Russians didn't fix the pipes, and so most of the water is literally just pouring out into the street. Look at this.
Я нахожусь на улице Бабки Анжи. Сегодня 6 июня. Вот дали воду. В том состоянии труба находится.
What's okay? I was going to sit here and be quiet through this, but what is the point of turning the water back on if there's going to be no pressure in the pipes? That's just literally something to do it. That doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, if the Russians were actually trying to show that they were benevolent invaders, which obviously we know they're not at this point, 3.5 months in, they've killed nearly over 50,000 civilians or more, but you would at least think they would try and patch the pipes so that way they'd actually maintain their water pressure instead of just turning them on for the hell of it and letting the water just run out. So with that, that's the end of the video, and you can see that the Russians are literally just doing stuff for the propaganda of it practically. I'm sure that they're broadcasting this on news in Russia saying the gracious Russian liberators have turned the water back on after the Ukrainians had turned it off for 5 years and tried to kill everyone of thirst. And now we can see the water just pouring out in the street. And if there's water pouring out like that, obviously there's probably very little water pressure, if not any, in that pipe. And so it's almost unusable. So with that, we're now going to be moving on out of Mariupol because that's all the news we've gotten from there. We're now going to move further down the front line towards the area of Zaporizhia. On day 103, we actually saw the Azov assaulting Russian positions. Once again, recap, there are multiple Azov units in the Ukrainian military, and only one of them was in the Azovstal in Mariupol. There are still multiples operating around the country. I believe there's one up near Kharkiv, and there's also one near the Zaporizhian front line. And here we can see this unit in action. Here's the video. Now, one thing I do have to note, I have to be fair with this. I don't hear a lot of return fire. I'm not saying this is I'm not saying this is fake off the bat because I don't hear return fire. Maybe the Russians are actually pinned down, but at the same time, I don't hear any return fire. So we're going to go through this video. Well, at least I'm going to go through this video with a little bit of an open mind. This may be something that the Azov has tried to make in counter of the Russians. I don't know. But we're going to keep on going through this video and find out. We can now see them advancing, but once again, the amount of fire is small. We can now see them moving forward past a foxhole, it appears, and down a small trail. And we can now hear a helicopter flying over. Wait a minute. I just realized this just hit me. This is an old video. We've seen this one before, but they've edited out the firefight, like the actual part where there was a heavy firefight, because now I remember there was a heavy firefight in this video. We did hear return fire, and the Ukrainians in this video did make it up to the Russian trench and started shooting into it. But someone has gone through and reposted this video like it's new and edited it heavily enough where it looks different and you don't even hear any return fire. And so I do remember this video now. It was a real firefight, but someone's gone through and clipped it up to make it look like there's no return fire and it's just them shooting at nothing. So with that, we're actually going to get off this video and move on to the next one because there's no point in showing something we've already shown on stream. And we're now going to move to the day 104 news, where you've seen the 44th Brigade that is in the area of the Zaporizhia front line hitting Russian grads and also apparently a location where they've been storing ammunition. Now, something that's has become to be nearly obvious at this point is where the Russians store ammunition. They're always trying to store it in these factory buildings or large warehouses in the middle of the countryside, which I believe means that the Ukrainians ought to start obliterating these things. So let's find Google Maps. We'll just type in Kharkiv, so that way we can get on Google Maps. And let me show y'all one that I would just hit for the hell of it at this point, because it nearly seems like the Russians only use these kinds of buildings to store ammunition. So let's get that thing off. Let's go to Polohi. Alright, so, looking at Polohi, there's of course the factory that was hit the other day, so they've already hit that. This area, nah, it wouldn't be used. Let's just try and go through and find something real quick. This actually looks like the exact same building here, which it is. So that was one I was about to pick out. Let's see here. This building down here, these buildings most likely be used as a small little ammunition depot. Heading further up towards the front line, I feel like this is getting into dangerous territory that the Russians wouldn't use. But this building here, I would take a look at that. I would also take a look at that one. Because it seems like every single video we see that the Russians are using a very similar shaped building to store ammunition in. And so I would just start hitting all of these buildings at random, because you're most likely going to hit a Russian ammunition depot in one of them. We can now see the artillery coming in. We now see it hitting directly onto this large warehouse. They've gotten 2 good hits in on it. It looks like they may have gotten 4, and now they've gotten a 5th good hit, and it appears that it may have hit something in there, because now it's caught on fire, and it's burning. And James Ortiz just asked, destroy random property, and the answer to that's a yeah, because in a war, you usually want to, well, they're going to the ammunition, but in a war, you usually want to try and strike at the Russians first, and now that we've gotten a repeated pattern of where they store ammunition stores, there's proof of it right there, I would just go around and make sure that civilians aren't frequenting these large buildings that I pointed out, and if they aren't, and you can get like a repeatable pattern of that, like civilians aren't going into that building, I would just strike them for the hell of it, really, and then after the war is over, once you retake the ground, just reimburse the people who own that building for the property damage, and then move on. Now I gotta say, that was one hell of an explosion, and we can see another one. I think these may even be, of course this is an exaggeration, but these may be competing for the Beirut explosion that occurred in 2020, I believe. We can now see that most of the building has burned down, and we can tell for sure due to the massive explosion that it was definitely an ammunition stowage. So with that, that is the end of the video, and we can see that the Ukrainians did not wipe out a pretty sizable ammunition depot. I can see a couple of people, and I'm going to argue this one a little bit again, saying, what, destroy random property? You've got to understand that every time the Ukrainians attack one of these ammunition supply depots, they are attacking random property, because there's the off chance that they got incorrect information and they're hitting a storage building with nothing in it. So every single time you hit a building like that, you could just be hitting nothing, but we can see almost every single time the Ukrainians are hitting something. And now that we've gotten a repeatable and verifiable pattern across the entirety of the front lines that these kinds of buildings are used to house ammunition, I would go to a place like Severodonetsk, and I would assume that a building like this would most likely be an ammunition storage. Of course, I wouldn't hit Donetsk because I don't believe they would be putting the ammunition there. It would most likely be closer towards Marinka, for example, in this building here. This would most likely be a place that Russians house ammunition, and of course collect a little bit of information, but at least we have a key suspect now in terms of the building's size and shape to go for and say that that's most likely housing Russian ammunition, and at least fly drones over them regularly to see if that information is true, and then if you can get enough information to verify that, then hit it, to add a little bit of extra security to it so that way you're not just striking random buildings in the middle of nowhere and destroying them. But with that, we're now going to move further down the front and away from Zaporizhia and down towards Kherson, where we can actually see that today the tosses were being heavily used again. It appears that the Russians are desperately using tosses in this area to try and hold the Ukrainian advances. We haven't seen tosses used like this anywhere else on the front line, and nowhere else like this during the entirety of the war. And so I'm believing that they're using these to the massive extent they are, because they may be holding the Ukrainians back a little bit more than, say, the normal Russian artillery piece. It also has copyrighted music playing, so unfortunately won't be able to play that. You see the toss explosions in the distance. Of course, thermobarics are highly questionable. They're on the borderline of being a war crime, depending on how they're used. The United States has used thermobarics in the past, but as time has gone on, we've seen thermobarics being used less and less by the U.S. military. And now we're seeing them being used progressively more and more by the Russian forces as this war continues to drag on, and specifically around the Kherson area. We also saw in a previous video, based off of the drop rate on these missiles, that the TOS has to be very close to the front lines to fire, usually under 8 miles in distance. And so based off of that, we know that if we ever see a TOS barrage like this on film, a TOS is only about 8 miles away. And while that's still a pretty decent distance, that's about the same range as a heavy mortar. And so this is putting it very well within range of counter battery fire. We can, of course, see more barrages. We don't see any military units in this village, and the Russians aren't clearly showing them to us, which makes it highly doubtful that there's any military units here, and so, of course, they're conducting a thermobaric attack on a civilian population in this village. Now, to the people who said I was demanding to hit random property, this is clear evidence of the Russians hitting random property. And this has no rhyme or reason. They're not even trying to attack what appears to be perhaps military infrastructure or some kind of storage. They're just going for houses at random. So with that, that's the end of the video. We can, of course, see the Russians committing even more war crimes like they normally have been. We're now going to move down to our last bit of news from the actual front lines in the Southern Front. And then after that, we're going to be covering the news around the rest of the country and in the Black Sea. So, moving on down towards the Kherson area in particular, we can actually see a comedy classic resurge on film. I'm only going to show a little bit of this because, of course, you can only take this guy in moderation. But here we can see the one and only, I think he gives Jerry Seinfeld and all the other comedians a run for their money, Patrick Lancaster, who really believes in the Russian cause and is out there reporting for it. So here's the video of him acting like a clown.
I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we're headed in the direction of the border, or the end of the Kherson region, which is controlled by Russian forces. And we're going to be going to a Russian artillery position that is going to be engaging Ukrainian forces positions in Ukrainian-held territory.
You know, he just spoke for 30 seconds, and he said absolutely nothing. I know a lot of my viewers are used to that, because I say absolutely nothing, but still, I just heard this guy say nothing. He said, we're going to go, pretty much here's what he said in 30 seconds. We're going to go to a Russian artillery unit that's committing artillery fire on the Ukrainians near the Kherson region. That's all he said, and it took him 30 seconds to say that.
Just on the border of the Kherson region.
So we're now going to skip forward.
Intentions were what we've just passed, but I think everything's all right.
Мы сейчас едем в направлении переднего края наших войск на огневые позиции артиллерии.
И что будет сделать?
Соответственно...
You know, I'm going to cover this little tidbit that I was about to say near the end of the video, but we're going to skip forward and only watch about 30 seconds of this thing near the end, you know, when we see Lancaster in full comedy routine action, you know, jumping to the gunfire and the sounds of the shots and stuff. So, anyways, here's the video of him acting like a true clown, because I found this earlier on.
And right now we are with the Russian army.
He tries to do this each and every time, but he ends up looking like an idiot, waving his arms around like some kind of chicken and jumping at the sound of the shots. So let's watch that one more time.
I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we are with the Russian army.
Jump. Jump.
About to engage, and as you see, engage Ukrainian forces across the border of Kherson.
Someone better calm him down before he has an asthma attack here, because it looks like he's about to actually have one. But with that, we're now going to skip past this. I'm not going to torture y'all with this goofball for too long. And on top of that, considering that he's an American citizen over in Russia reporting on this war, and we've clearly picked a side, although we haven't, you know, militarily chosen the side, I would consider this man a traitor, and I hope that the United States puts him on a blacklist and hopefully does something to him like revoke his citizenship, considering he's in a rival country that is literally acting against America's interests. I consider this treason. With that, we're now going to be moving outside of the front lines. We're now going to be moving towards Odessa, where we've seen a near miss today. I don't know how this Su-30 missed this helicopter, but it was a very good stroke of luck. Here we can see the Semi-17, that's Ukrainian, flying low to the river, and an Su-30, which is apparently almost stalling out based off of how fast it's going, trying to shoot it down. It fires this autocannon at the helicopter, but it does miss somehow, and the helicopter continues on to fly in the video, but we don't know if it got shot down later. You can now finally hear the sound catching up of the autocannon firing, and the Mi-17 is still flying, letting us know he missed. Very lucky for that Ukrainian helicopter crew. They probably have to change their pants, and hopefully they didn't get shot down later. A very close call for them, and a very unlucky miss for that Russian helicopter. With that, we're now going to be moving out into the Black Sea, where today we saw that the Russians were firing more caliber cruise missiles towards Ukraine. Of course, we don't know where these were being fired, but the volume of them lets us know that all of them were most likely not heading to the same target, and these were targeting multiple Ukrainian cities. Usually these hit residential infrastructure, killing civilians in the process, which is of course a war crime. So what we're seeing here is the potential... Of course, I'm going to have to mute this, but we can see the ship out in the distance. I'm assuming it's some kind of a destroyer or frigate, since that's all the Black Sea Fleet has left, firing off all of these calibers. So with that, that's the end of the video. Of course, not really much to note there. It's just a caliber launch. You know, it's pretty much self-explanatory. So we're now going to be moving up towards the area of Lviv, where we can actually see new Polish gear being used by the Ukrainians, at least on this dirt road somewhere in eastern Ukraine. We're not sure exactly where, so the marker isn't accurate in the slightest. It's somewhere in eastern Ukraine, but we don't know exactly where. And we can now see the Polish T-72s passing these Polish armored personnel carriers that the Ukrainians are also using. Once again, it's wonderful to see that the Polish have provided as much support as possible to the Ukrainians. Of course, the Polish and the Ukrainians consider each other very close friends, and based off of the amount of support that's been provided to Ukraine, we can see that actions speak louder than words, and the Polish are one of Ukraine's best friends. It's just always good to see the kind of armor variety that the Ukrainians are getting. And it appears, actually, if we back up this video, just want to make sure on this one real quick. Let me go back a little bit further. That appears to be an M113. I think all of these may be M113s that were provided by the United States or another country. I believe a couple of other countries have provided M113s. Or this is some other kind of armored personnel carrier. I can't really tell for certain. But we can see that they do have a wide variety of Western gear. Apparently Dutch YPRs, that's what I was looking for. They're very similar to an M113. But of course, great to see that the Ukrainians are fielding Western equipment, and then a large amount of Western equipment is making it to them for them to be able to train on and then hopefully field on the front lines. With that, we've now gone full circle. We've now returned back to the capital of Kyiv, where we of course are going to look at the speech from President Zelensky. And so, here it is, the speech from the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who is claimed to have wiped out 31,000 Russian troops as of today. The Russians have, of course, been losing 300 lives a day. And, of course, he's going to cover all of that in the speech. But without further ado, here's the speech from President Zelensky.
Бажаю здоров'я. Коротко звітую про день, що минув. Було багато активностей, як дипломатичних, так і внутрішньополітичних. По-перше, урядом утворюється штаб для підготовки до наступного опалювального сезону. Це рішення ухвалене за результатами наради, яку я сьогодні провів з представниками уряду, так і з представниками наших найбільших державних енергокомпаній і регуляторів. Прем'єр-міністр України, міністри енергетики, економіки, міністр розвитку громад і територій, керівники НАК «Нафтогазу», «Укренерго», «Енергоатому» та НКРЕКП. Був також і профільний заступник керівника Офісу президента. Щоб не планували собі окупанти, ми маємо готуватись до наступної зими в нашій державі, на своїй землі, для всіх наших громадян. Обговорили сьогодні питання закупівлі достатнього обсягу газу на опалювальний сезон, накопичування, вугілля, виробництва електроенергії. В умовах, які ми маємо наразі через агресію Росії, через цю війну, це дійсно буде найскладніша зима за всі роки незалежності. Але все нормально, маємо пройти її так, щоб наші люди відчували нормальну роботу держави. Так і буде. У цей час у нас не буде продажу нашого газу і вугілля за кордон. Увесь внутрішній видобуток буде направлений на внутрішні потреби наших громадян. Водночас робимо все для того, щоб наростити наші можливості експорту електрики. Це дозволять робити наявні в Україні потужності, а після історичного приєднання нашої держави до об'єднаної енергомережі Європи такий експорт, він не тільки дозволяє нам збільшувати нашу валютну виручку, але й прямо впливати на стабілізацію енергетичної ситуації в країнах-сусідах, які скорочують споживання російських енергоресурсів. Ще один важливий аспект – це ремонтна програма для ТЕЦ для котелень. Зокрема, для тих, які були пошкоджені чи повністю розбиті російськими ударами. Виконання цієї програми найближчими місяцями – це одне із топ-завдань для Міністерства енергетики України. Хочу окремо підкреслити, що поставив уряду дуже конкретне завдання зробити все, щоб тарифи на газ і електрику і в наступному опалювальному сезоні не змінилися. Людям і так складно, бо війна. Це буде забезпечено. Місцева влада відповідає за тарифи на тепло і на гарячу воду. І на місцевому рівні має бути забезпечена така сама незмінність тарифів і зимою 2022-2023 років. Також провів нараду щодо комунікації з Європейським Союзом і з окремими країнами-членами Європейського Союзу по нашій заявці і набуттю статусу кандидата. Дипломатична активність по цьому напрямку не припиняється ні на день. Щоденно я заслуховую звіти, зокрема і щодо підготовки процедурних рішень в Європейському Союзі. І команда Міністерства закордонних справ, наші дипломати, і команда влади в цілому всі, абсолютно всі працюють для того, щоб вже в червні з'явилось вагоме, історичне рішення, яке ми всі очікуємо. Україна зі свого боку виконала усю, абсолютно усю необхідну роботу для цього. Як кажуть у таких випадках, м'яч на полі європейських структур, на полі європейських країн. Фронтова ситуація в Україні за минулу добу не зазнала суттєвих змін. Продовжується абсолютно героїчна оборона Донбасу. Найгарячіші точки ті самі, передусім Северодонетськ, Lysychansk, Попасна тощо. Відчувається, абсолютно відчувається, що окупанти не вірили, що опір наших військових буде таким міцним, і тепер намагаються задіяти додаткові ресурси на Донбаському напрямку. Як і на Херсонському, перекидають туди нові підрозділи, щоб стримувати наші дії. Але який в тому сенс для них? Все одно більшість окупаційного континенту вже чудово зрозуміла, що у них немає перспектив в Україні. Ми фіксуємо цей настрій у відповідних перехопленнях розмов. Саме такий настрій домінує в російській армії. Ми свободні люди. Ми не ваші раби. Вже більш ніж 31 тисяча російських військових загинули в Україні. За час з 24 лютого Росія сплачує за абсолютно безглузду війну проти України майже по 300 життів своїх солдатів щоденно. І все одно настане день, коли кількість втрат навіть для Росії перетне межу допустимого. Активно працюємо, щоб залучити кошти для підтримки нашої армії і для відновлення України після бойових дій. На територіях, які вже деокуповані, повертаємо електрику, газ, постачання води, зв'язок. Не просто, але повертаємо. Звичайно, потрібно ще багато зробити. Потрібно знову забезпечити лікарні обладнанням, провести розмінування і, звичайно, відбудувати усе зруйноване окупантами. Один із інструментів для цього – державна фандрейзингова платформа United24. Тільки за перший місяць роботи за її допомогою вдалося залучити вже понад 1,5 мільярди гривень. І я вдячний усім, хто долучився до її створення, до її роботи. Сьогодні амбасадоркою United24 стала Еліна Світоліна, наша відома і дуже успішна тенісистка, разом з Андрієм Шевченком, перший амбасадор United24. Еліна працюватиме, щоб залучити нову підтримку для нашої держави. Все для України. Саме так, працюючи разом, кожен і кожна зможемо повернути нормальне життя на всі наші території, яким наші військові повернули безпеку. І ще одна новина, про яку зараз можна повідомити. На наступний тиждень запланований запуск спеціальної книги катів, інформаційної системи, в якій збираються підтверджені дані щодо воєнних злочинів і злочинців російської армії. Я неодноразово наголошував, що всі вони обов'язково понесуть відповідальність. І ми крок за кроком до цього наближаємось. Створення такої інформаційної системи тримає і деякий час. Це конкретні факти про конкретних людей, які винні у конкретних жорстоких злочинах проти українців. І така книга катів є однією з основ не тільки відповідальності безпосередніх виконавців воєнних злочинів, солдатів окупаційної армії, але й їхніх командирів, тих, хто віддав накази, тих, хто зробив можливим усе, що вони наробили в Україні, в Бучі, в Маріуполі, в усіх наших містах, в усіх громадах, до яких дотягнулося. Усі будуть відповідати. Вічна пам'ять усім, чиє життя забрали ці окупанти. Вічна слава кожному і кожній, хто наближає нашу перемогу. Слава Україні!
And that is the end of President Zelensky's speech, and that rounds out the day 103 and 104 news segment. We'll, of course, be moving to the question segment here in a minute. If you were here for the news alone and you did enjoy the stream, please make sure to subscribe and also like the video and comment as well in the live chat or in the chat after this becomes a video. It helps out a lot, and also if you do subscribe, you will be notified if you hit the bell button of all of these streams, which come on every single day of the week, except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, where I cover the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine and also give analysis as to what's happening on the front lines if possible. We also upload daily summaries. Of course, those have been removed from Monday as well. Nothing on this channel is uploaded on Mondays anymore, but there will be daily summaries uploaded around 6 p.m. Eastern Time, around there-ish. And those will also be covering some of the highlight videos and some of the most pertinent information of the day in a very short and condensed segment of around 30, well, not 30, around 3 minutes. So with that, I thank you so much for watching if you're here for the news alone. If you want to hear some of the questions or see if one of your questions did get answered from the live chat, or if you send in a super chat, please stick around because we will answer every single super chat and we'll answer a couple of live chats as well. And so before we get into those questions, Matthew, how many super chats do we have?
So it looks like we're currently sitting at about 25 super chats.
All right, and so with that in mind, the news went on incredibly long tonight. It was actually around like a 2 hour and 30-minute news segment, which is one of the longest ones we've had. And so sadly, we're not going to have time to answer questions beyond this point. So we're actually going to be putting on the cutoff here. And so if you put in a super chat beyond this point, we're probably not going to be able to get around to answering a question if you have one. So if you would like to support the channel nonetheless and maybe send in a super chat and have a question attached, make sure to send in one on tomorrow's stream, and we'll try and answer it first thing if it's put in, early on in the stream. Or if you would just like to support the channel in general, make sure to go check out the merch store, because we do have some pretty cool stuff over there. And on top of getting like a cool shirt or something for your support, you can also show your support to the channel to all of your friends by wearing the shirt. And hopefully the design is cool enough that other people are like, hey, dude, that's a cool shirt. What is that? You can tell them all about this wonderful channel if you do think it's wonderful. And so with that, I thank everyone for their support, but we sadly won't be able to take any more super chats for the rest of the night. So we're going to answer all of the ones we have right now, and also some from the live chat, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream. And so with that, what is the first question we've got, Matthew?
All right, and first up, we have a $50 super chat from one of our channel regulars, William Allen, who says, the Russian Legion are fighting against the tyranny of Putin. It's something all Americans should relate to. God bless the defense of liberty for all people of the world.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, William, and I also like the little comment you made there. That was a pretty nice one. And I do believe that Americans should be similarly equipped historically to side with the Ukrainians, but I believe that the Ukrainians are facing something far worse than the Americans ever faced. The worst thing that the Americans ever faced in the Revolutionary War, for example, was the Boston Massacre, which was, it's questionable if it was really a massacre. Like 4 people getting killed by the military, sure, that's not great, but I think there was more people killed in the Kent State massacre, I guess you could say, in the 70s than were killed at the Boston Massacre, or a very similar number, or just a little bit under. So, I mean, like, that was really the worst the British ever did. Of course, the movie Patriot would have you think they went around the countryside burning down churches full of people, but the British were largely running a kind of like an ad campaign in the colonies during the war, like, hey, we're really nice too. Y'all can like us, right? Like, don't you want to be friends with us instead of those rebel colonists? And so, in the perspective of fighting for one's liberty and freedom, yes, we can relate entirely. But I think the Ukrainians are facing an evil far worse than the British just imposing taxes and shooting a couple of people down at Boston Harbor that were throwing clubs at him. But still, I understand where you're coming from, and I do agree. I think that the United States can stand with really any country that fights for its liberty around the globe, and Ukraine is certainly one of those countries right now. And I hope we can continue to provide the support that we've been giving them this entire time, and even more if need be, to make sure that we can help them win this war, and of course secure stability, and hopefully Western influence over the entirety of Eastern Europe. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, William, and of course the support helps out this channel a great deal, and I hope that answers the comment pretty well. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $25 donation from AJS9437, and this is their second super chat of the night, so thank you very much for your continued support. And they say, I was unaware of Gaijin being based in Hungary. I may be hopping back into War Thunder very soon. As for my question, how important do you think the Russian-Ukraine war will be for future generations, specifically in reference to the United States and Western European countries, in understanding the tolls of war?
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you do get into War Thunder again soon. That's something that a lot of people had a misconception about, and I think they got a bad rap for it. And also, Grandpa War Thunder, or whatever his name is, I never really cared for him anyways, but apparently he's had some problems, but you can look into that a little bit better. But anyways, to answer that question, I think that this war will be much like many others, for example, Vietnam and Afghanistan, both from the Soviet and the American perspective, in terms of how it shows the horrors of war and kind of how pointless it is. While on Ukraine's perspective, it's incredibly it's an incredibly worthy cause. Of course, they're fighting for the defense of their nation and their sovereignty. But on the Russian side of things, there's really no point to this war. The Russians, the supposed Russian-speaking people in the Donbass don't even want them there. And so what are they really fighting for? Nothing. And so I believe that in that perspective, it's going to be another war that goes down into the books like it was a pointless war, started over pointless reasons, where the country invading didn't really have a good purpose to, and then they got ground down into a stalemate pretty much, or into a counteroffensive, and lost. So I believe that in that perspective, it's going to be portraying I guess you could say kind of like a tabletop chess game where, you know, of course the Russians failed again, much like many countries do in that regard. But in terms of the horrors of war, I think the horrors of war are by and large missed on a lot of people. Like, you know, you can try and iterate the horrors of war to school kids about World War I as much as possible, but I just don't think it ever really hits people, especially when you're in school, because I remember here in Alabama, there's always a huge deal about the Holocaust. That's something that Alabama schools cover the most. I mean, like, our history classes are almost Holocaust classes, and about how terrible the Nazis treated the Jews and such. And whenever that's covered in school, it doesn't really have the same effect as when you're out of school actually watching and reading the same stuff, because of course people want to make jokes about it and it's taken very lightly. And of course, not to dog on public education all too much, but a lot of teachers really get a lot of stuff wrong whenever they're teaching history, and so none of it's ever right. You know, like I had a history teacher say that in the American Revolutionary War, the entire Royal Navy arrived in North America and literally just sailed up and down the coast and obliterated and leveled every single city that was in reach. And that was very wrong. That was not historically accurate. But you know, I think that's the reason. I think that will be something that kind of hinders kids learning about the horrors of this war and what it was really like in the future. And also, a lot of people don't care. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And a lot of kids, especially in school, have that kind of mindset. If it's not something happening right now, then it's pointless. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're going to be moving on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from William Allen, a channel legend, who says, I got my Leaf Spring Army t-shirt yesterday. Awesome. Now, where's my cup?
Well, thank you so much for the support, and I'm also glad to hear you finally got your shirt. We aren't doing mugs anymore, just because of certain reasons, but I don't know. We're gonna look at that. We're maybe going to revisit that again. But you know, I hope you do enjoy the shirt. I do think we still have thermoses, don't we, Matthew, on the merch store?
Yes.
So if you want a thermos, we always have those. But mugs right now, we do not have. I'm sorry to say that, but I do thank you so much for the support, and I hope you do enjoy that shirt, and I hope it looks great. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Oilam, who says, "To victory."
And I have to agree to victory as well. I hope the Ukrainians win and are able to push the Russians back enough. They don't have to push them entirely out of the country. They just have to push them back enough for the Russians to consider the situation unattainable and then hopefully get some kind of peace agreement. While it might not be a perfect peace agreement, a peace agreement is still better than none. And the sooner peace comes, the better. But of course, we don't want to give up I guess you could say freedom for peace. You know, that's a very age-old comment there, and I still think it rings true to this day. Also, I see a lot of people talking about the Revolutionary War in the in the live chat, and I also saw someone say a little bit of a historical mistruth, which is spread around a lot in the United States, but I think this needs to be clarified a lot more in school. I don't know if you're from the United States, but someone said 1776 U.S. declared independence from Britain. 36 years later, in 1812, the British attempted to take it back. That is not true at all. The United States was actually the one who declared war on the British in the War of 1812. And actually, if you listen to a lot of the recorded, and when I say recorded, I mean like written down, discussions in the Senate and the House of Representatives, you could see that a lot of people were wanting to go to war with Britain to annex Canada. Which is a really interesting thing that not a lot of people talk about. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, who I believe was either a senator or a representative at that point, again after his presidency, said that it was only a matter of marching to annex Canada. And so we were actually, the whole entire War of 1812 was caused in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars because, you know, Britain was tied up overseas with the French for the large part, and we thought that due to the situation, and also a lot of insulting gestures that were taken by both the French and the British, you know, of course, in the Atlantic, with the XYZ affair and whatnot, that declaring war on Britain and annexing Canada would be very simple because they had a very small garrison there, that the Americans believed they could push over and really just annex the entirety of Canada and have that be the end of it. But then that war didn't really turn out the way it was supposed to. Washington D.C. got burned to the ground, and you know it didn't really turn out that way. But actually, the British had no plans of coming over here and trying to retake the United States. That was never really on the table, and that's why you saw, although the British were making pretty good ground in the United States, you know, obviously beating the I guess you could say the U.S. Army at that point at the Battle of Bladensburg, just north of Washington D.C., and then marching down to Washington, burning the city, and then marching back up towards Baltimore and also bombarding Fort McHenry. They were literally around the nucleus of the U.S. government at that point, chasing them away and running them down. And they didn't really try and, you know, annex the country even at that and take it back over. At that point, they kind of just consigned the colonies as a loss, and that was that, you know, just about 36 years ago. So I hope that kind of addresses that that comment, because it's not exactly historically accurate based off of modern context and what we know now. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And now let me recognize a few donations without comments. We have a few $20 super chats. We have one from Martin Haig. We have one from Benny Grandstrom. Also one from Jeff Brown and Greg Carmen. So thank you very much to all of you for your support of the channel. We appreciate it as always, and it helps us run the channel. So thank you very much for all of that support. And moving on to our next super chat, we have a $20 one from Sean Collins, who says, "What is your favorite Ukraine-sourced and made weapon, and what do you think is the most effective Ukraine-sourced and made weapon?" They can be different weapons.
Well, I'm going to answer that with one single weapon. The best thing that they produce and field is by far the Stugna. We've seen the Stugna knock out more tanks than I believe any system in the modern world has individually at this point. And so I would say by far that's the best domestically produced and operated weapon that the Ukrainians have. 100%. We've seen video after video of that thing knocking out Russian tanks. It doesn't even have to have a top-down attack function to destroy them. It usually can just hit them on the front glacis and they're out. So with that, I hope that does answer the question in brief, and I thank you so much for the support. It does help out this channel a great deal. And I also thank everyone who put in support without a comment, because it's greatly appreciated as well. Of course, I didn't get to recognize each of y'all individually, but I thank you all so much for your support, because y'all don't know that that helps out our channel a huge deal and keeps it running. And so I hope that did answer the question, at least in brief. It was a very simple answer for me because the Stugna is the best one they got. And so with that, I thank you once again, and we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $20 donation from Augustin Lara, who says, here's some money for tacos. Do you think the Russian military will fix all of their shortcomings now that they have been brought to light during this war? Thank you for what you do, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and we will get some tacos. Matthew is a huge fan of fish tacos. He kills those things. So I know he will definitely get some tacos. He loves them. I also think they're good, too. It's just that I don't really eat them much for some reason, but they're great. But to move on to that question, yes, the Russians, of course, will say that there were shortcomings and they're going to attempt reform, but the question whether that actually happens or not is a whole other thing. Historically, it's not going to happen. The only time they've had major military reforms was after the First Chechen War, and beyond that, their army has stagnated in terms of progress and innovation in almost every single aspect, and so I don't believe that they're actually going to change things. They'll say they will, and of course they'll recognize the shortcomings, but they're not actually going to change anything. It's most likely going to stay stagnant after the war, just based off of historical precedent. After the problems they had in Georgia and also in the Second Chechen War with logistics and communications, we can see even now they still have not fixed those primary problems. So with that, I hope that does address the question, and I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from another channel legend, BC Skyman, who says, did you see the interview with the 2 Ukrainian helicopters flew to Mariupol with supplies? Did you ever play Halo? And keep it up, Enforcers.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I've never actually played, well, I played Halo a little bit with a friend, but I'm not really a big fan of fictional games. I usually like my games, really like based in reality. So like War Thunder, Flight Simulator, Train Simulator, you know, like Civ 6, that's not really based in reality. Hearts of Iron 4, Europa Universalis, Beyond the Wire, Squad, Verdun, Tannenberg. I usually play like historically realistic games. Of course, I'm a historic guru, and so I just love that stuff, even if it is a little bit historically inaccurate. So I've never played Halo, but I have seen that video about the helicopters flying supplies to Mariupol, but I've never actually watched the interviews, because by the time that stuff all came out, it was so long ago by the time I saw it that I couldn't even feel right uploading that into the stream for the nightly news. And so sadly, I didn't even watch it. I just saw it. I was like, oh man, I wish I was able to see that when it was happening. And then I just was having to move on because I was pressed for time. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question at least a little bit. And with that, I thank you very much once again for the support. It helps out our channel a lot, and I'm very appreciative to everyone who always helps us out with running this channel. And with that being said, we are on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $20 super chat from Paul Smalzer. And unfortunately, Paul, the Nightbot has been picking on people who have been saying your name tonight, and I have no idea why it's doing that, but we're going to have to get it fixed. So Paul says, although Zelensky is doing great as a wartime leader and has my full respect and my prayers for success, I still have to go with Ronald Reagan as my number one, but he is a close second in my own opinion.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I understand everyone's always got their favorite guy. Honestly, my favorite guy, and he's still not been surpassed by Zelensky, is Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a man who was pure in his convictions, and he was a dauntless and brave guy. You know, if you ever look at his history in the Spanish-American War, he was a brave man. I mean, like, you know, and especially also as a police commissioner in New York City, he also did an incredibly good job with that. And then he had some just very cool, interesting stories of his ventures around the world, you know, where he went to South America and almost died from disease, and then when he went out into the Midwest to become a rancher and he knocked out a guy in one punch. I mean, like, he's got a bunch of incredible stories. I think Theodore Roosevelt was an incredibly cool guy, and not just for who he was and his personality, but also what he did as president. We could see that he was the first guy to try and bring America forward into the modern age, and also he did a lot of things that everyone can respect, I believe, like the National Park Service. A lot of people love really, honestly, I can't think of anyone who hates the national parks, and he was the guy who founded pretty much the National Park Service the way it is today. And also, he did a whole bunch of stuff like the Food and Drug Act, which brought the first, I guess you could say, food regulation standards by and large to the United States. And I have to credit him a lot with what the United States has become today. Really started off with Theodore Roosevelt. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. And I think that he is one of the most influential and also one of the most honest presidents we have. He was so honest that he was willing to throw down his support for the Republican Party. And we're not going to go into party politics, but he threw down his support for the Republican Party and made his own party in an attempt to just do what he wanted, because he thought that the Republican Party had strayed away from what he thought Taft was going to do. And so he was like, I'm not even going to go with the Republican Party. I'm just going to make my own. And that tells you how strongly convicted he was to his own ideas, that he would go and do something like that. And then he ended up splitting the ticket, and Woodrow Wilson got elected. And then that was a whole other thing that's historically questionable, and, you know, is usually filled with controversy because Wilson is a very colorful character to a lot of people. I'm not going to weigh in on that. But still, I understand that you pick Reagan, but honestly, I am a huge Teddy Roosevelt fan. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we are on to the next question.
And next up here, I want to recognize a few more donations without comments. We have a $20 super chat from Sharon Tukolsky, a $17 super chat from Greg Archer, and a $10 from Natoya85. Thank you very much to all three of you for your support of the channel. And unfortunately, we don't have any comments from you, but we appreciate the support and the love.
And I also want to thank them as well, real
ahead.
quick. I always just want to make sure I recognize all of them, and I thank you all so much for the support, and it does help out this channel a lot. And so thank you from the bottom of both of our hearts, because if it wasn't for everyone's support, of course, the channel couldn't keep running. So thank you so much for, you know, helping us to continue on with this thing. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Zach Jeffers, who says Ukraine is strong.
I do have to agree, Ukraine is pretty strong, especially for a country of their economic size and also their population. There's only 40 million people who live in Ukraine, which, when putting into perspective of their neighbors, is a pretty small number. But somehow, with only 40 million people and an economy that's less than $1 trillion, I believe it's around 800 billion, GDP of Ukraine. Let's see here. Oh, wait a minute, way lower than that. It's only 155 billion. What's their GDP per capita? It's 13,260. I believe that's Ukrainian dollars, but what is it in US dollars? We won't have an answer to that, sadly. But still, not a large GDP whatsoever. 155 billion is 10% of what the Russian economy is, and yet we can see a country with a much smaller economy, 10 times smaller, actually holding back the Russians and beating them. And so I do agree, Ukraine is very strong. And so I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $10 donation from Sniper1, who says coffee fund for the Enforcer and Matt.
And I thank you very much for the coffee fund, Sniper. It, of course, helps us out a lot, and we desperately need coffee to keep on running. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and also being a return supporter and viewer as well. It's always great to know we have a lot of supporters out there in our community. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Sam Marson, who says, how many years do we think it'll take Russia to replenish its tanks, vehicles, aircraft, ships, etc. that have been lost thus far in the war? Will it be maybe 2 decades? And your thoughts, Director of Enforcement?
Well, I thank you very much for the support and also give me a brand new title. And to answer that question, I'm not really sure how long it would take. It would depend on how long the sanctions last. Because if the sanctions are still in place, they may never be able to replace the tanks that they've lost because they won't have the technology to equip them with. So sadly, I can't really give you an actual estimate or a figure, but I would assume that it would take at least over 5 years, but I don't know how much longer beyond that. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does give at least a starting point to that question. But there, of course, once again, there's so much to consider with that one that is really hard to actually give an estimate figure. I would have to do a lot of math and a lot of figuring and then weigh in a lot of variables to come up with something like that. So I thank you once again. I hope that does answer the question, at least in brief. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And we are now known as the Directorate of Enforcement. So thank you very much for your super chat there, Sam. We appreciate it very much. And moving on, we have another super chat from William Allen, who puts in a $10 donation this time and says, repetitive firing the size of ammo and him standing there will probably have long-lasting effect on his internal organs. Ask any Army big shooter. Lots of shock to the system.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I don't know which video you're talking about. We did show a lot of artillery videos. I don't know if you're talking about the 2S1 firing or what, but I would agree that being around a large artillery piece and getting shaken, not stirred, will most likely mess your organs up a little bit. You know, of course, that's something that not a lot of people think about, especially with American football, which can cause a lot of head injuries just due to how people get tackled. But, you know, that's something that is a discussion for a whole other time. But still, it is something interesting to note. So I thank you very much once again for the support, William. And I also thank you for bringing that up because I do believe that you have some experience in that field. And, of course, it's always appreciated to hear a little bit of tidbit of info every once in a while. And so with that, thank you once again. And we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And next up, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Krister Peterson, one of our longtime channel supporters. Thank you very much for your donation to the channel. And moving on, we have a $10 donation from ZH, who says, the high ground under Lysychansk has a lot of tunnels from coal mining over the past century. Do you know if the Ukrainians are using them to shelter soldiers, weaponry, and ammo?
Well, I thank you very much for the support. But to answer that question, I don't think they would want to use those all too much. Mines are very susceptible to cave-ins. And so I don't think they would want to put people or supplies down there because those supplies or people could end up getting crushed by a cave-in or those supplies could be stuck behind one. And of course, if the ground is being bombarded above them heavily, it could, of course, lead to a higher frequency of cave-ins. So while they could use them, I don't think that would be their first option. And also, it would be very hard to access them because, of course, you'd have to travel down the mine shaft and bring the stuff back up. You know, of course, if it's like a straight down shaft, which may be the case, or it may be kind of like a slanted shaft where it just kind of goes at an angle downwards, and then you start going into the shafts that go straight down. You know, there's many ways that mines are built, but depending on what kind, that may lead them to not wanting to use it. And it also depends on the, I guess you could say, hardness of the rock around there, because if it's a softer rock, it could lead to cave-ins. So I hope that does address the question, and at least address the variables that may lead them to choosing to use one or not. And I thank you very much for the support. Sorry I couldn't really give a surefire answer on that, but there's a lot of variables I would put into that if I was commanding a unit on if I would put supplies or men down there or not. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And I just want to quickly address one thing. I saw BC Skyman say, what's up with the timeout? And for anybody that is wondering, the Nightbot is off the chain again tonight. It's decided to target the word Paul, so please avoid putting the word Paul in your message, or otherwise it will time you out. I don't know why it's doing that, but we're going to fix it once again. It seems like their Nightbot randomly decides to mess up just at any time it wants to, so please bear with us on that, and we'll have it fixed before tomorrow's stream. So moving on next, we have a $10 donation from Arctic, who says, come visit Ukraine after this war. Every supporter is welcome too. You will have a nice, relaxing time, especially in Lviv.
Well, thank you very much for the invite to Ukraine. Of course, the plan is, I'm not really sure if we'll actually be able to do this, but the plan is to actually travel over to Ukraine and try and make something like a video over there. Maybe that'll be my face reveal, I don't know. But we're thinking about doing that, and I think I would like to go over there Unfortunately, most of the country would be in ruins, especially on the eastern side, but it would still be nice to go around and see how people are doing, and see the people that we did support during this war through the Sunday fundraisers, and all the people that maybe watch the channel. I don't know. I mean, like, there are some Ukrainians who do watch these streams, but they're a very small amount. Also because this is literally like early in the morning for them. But I thank you so much for the support and also the invite over to Ukraine. I think we might be able to take you up on that, but don't hold me to that. But I thank you very much once again for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And I knew people were going to do it. Everybody's testing the Nightbot to see if the word Paul gets them timed out. And the Nightbot is acting like a sea ram, and it's destroying everybody that says the word. So, yes, it is doing what I said it's doing. So, please don't do that, or otherwise it's going to time you out, and that's unfortunate.
Oh, just got another one.
Yeah, it's deleting like every other message, basically. It's really going wild right now. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat, we have a $10 donation from Zyper Sniper 1, another legend of the channel, who says, if Putin is... Hold on, let me start over on that one. If Putin is too eager to use nukes, then why don't he just nuke himself, question mark.
Very good question. I think he doesn't want to do that because he still wants to live out his last pitiful days here on Earth, although we know that he's probably mortally, I guess you could say, afflicted with cancer at this point. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the question, at least in brief. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Derek Rosefan, who says, is it true that the Russians got their name by rushing into machine gun fire? I must know, Slava Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, I don't think so. You know, they've been called the Kievan Rus for a very long time, and then Rus just turned into Russia. But usually, the old saying is, when you're rushing for food, and there's no time for Stalin. And so maybe, yeah, I mean, I won't rule it out, but I don't know the specific origins of the word Rus in particular that led to Russia. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. Also, the pretty good joke there. I like that one. It was pretty creative. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up here, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Chris and Ted Sharp. Thank you very much for your donation to the channel. And up next, we have a $10 donation from Tangan Bragiri, who says, thank you for an awesome job and stream.
Well, I thank you so much for enjoying the stream tonight. I always try to deliver the best news I can, and I'm very glad that you did appreciate it. And so I thank you very much for the support to the channel, and also sending in a super chat to support it. Of course, that helps us to keep running, and it's always greatly appreciated. And so I thank you once again for the support. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Ministena, who says, please look up Azov Battalion on Facebook and help educate the Russian trolls there. Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, but sadly, I just don't think it's worth my time to really delve into Russian trolls much. They're pretty hard set on what they believe, and just trying to educating them is pointless. So I just tend to avoid them, and whenever I find them on my channel, I just outright ban them. So with that, thank you very much for the support. I hope that addresses the I hope that kind of addresses the way I deal with bots. I don't give them the time of day, or even a single thought. So with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Dad Good, who says, excellent stream as usual. Thanks, Enforcer and Matt.
Well, why'd you say Matt like that, man? I think you went Matt.
He spelled it with one T.
Well, that makes sense. I was like, why do you go, Matt? But anyways, I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you did enjoy the stream. It's always wonderful to know that a lot of people out there do like it. Because of course, I would hate for people to not like my stream. That would kind of be sad. But I'm glad that a lot of people do enjoy it. And so I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you did like tonight's stream. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 super chat from NOYDB, who says, YouTube channel I Stand With Ukraine, Natalia's channel, 3 excellent Mariupol vids today, including footage and interview with Ukrainian helicopter pilots who flew supply and rescue there.
Very interesting. Well, thank you very much for the little tidbit. I'll try and go over there and watch it, but of course, I don't really have a lot of time to watch war stuff. of course, after the streams and when I'm not trying to put it together. And also another thing is that I've of course, been looking at the war so much. Like, the war is about literally half of, or if not most of my waking day every single day. Usually whenever I do have free time, I try and focus on the war as little as possible. So I try and just do things like play games or talk to friends or something like that, because focusing on the war too much is not good for one's health. And while it's, of course, important to keep up to date on it, and it's, of course, important for me to compile the news and talk about it, I don't want my entire life consumed by it, because it is a little bit of a sad thing in a way. And it's also exhausting as well. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Mai Zhu Yang, who says, have you thought about doing the show early instead of at 9:10?
I have. We did that one time, and it didn't go well. And also on top of that, the schedule's pretty regular at this point, and I really don't want to do it earlier, because it will start to interfere with my day a massive amount. Because the way I do it right now, this is literally done at the end of my day. And so I have the entire day beforehand to do stuff, and then I start working around 4:30 my time all the way up till 9, and then I get on here and I stream from 9 till about 12. So and then I stay on till about 1 and look at stuff on my channel. So I don't think I want to change it, because right now the schedule is pretty good. And also it's very good for me to collect the news on, considering that this is just 24 hours after the start of the war, which is around 9 o'clock my time on the first day. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one. Before we move on to the next one, I would like to ask that everyone stops talking about politics. I see that the mention of a certain president from recent history has kind of started up a political chat here in the live chat, and it seems like it's kind of flaring up. So I just want to remind everyone, of course, this channel is not about politics. We don't want to make it about American politics. The channel is, of course, focusing on Ukraine. If anything, America and America's politics is a sideshow to this, and so I don't want this to become the priority of what's talked about in the comments section. So if everyone could please refrain from talking about politics and political policies, it would be greatly appreciated. If not, Matthew will have to come down there and start executing people. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Greg Sheely, who says, you talked about camo patterns the other day as World War I buff. What is your opinion of naval dazzle camo patterns during World War I? Slava Ukraine.
Oh, they were beautiful, weren't they? I think they were incredible. Let's pull them up. Dazzle camo. Dazzle camouflage pattern. We found it. These things were cool. I mean, like, these are the coolest camo schemes. This is, of course, from World War II. This appears to be I can't tell what class of ship that is, but they were still using it then. But still, it is a cool camo pattern. And we can actually see that someone apparently did a 3D render of the Queen Elizabeth class carriers that the British have. They have 2 of them in a dazzled camo, and they are just cool. I think that these are really one of the neatest forms of camouflage that were ever put on a ship. And the whole goal of it was to break the silhouette of the ship. It wasn't actually to camouflage it. It was to make it very difficult for a U-boat to figure out what side is the bow and which direction it's heading in. And so I think that this is honestly a really cool one. And I'm glad that you are a World War I history buff and do know a little bit about dazzle camouflages, because I honestly think that they were really cool. And so I hope that that does address the question a pretty good bit. And I also thank you very much for the support. That kind of looks like a fair mile, actually, when you try and look at it really, really hard. So I think that may be a small little fair mile boat. But anyways, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from another channel legend, Diffuse56, who said, I think he already got off for the night, by the way, but he said, no questions, just to thank you for all the work you guys do, and my hopes for Ukrainian success. Also, a salute to the Leaf Spring Army.
And I thank you so much for saluting the Leaf Spring Army. Of course, I know you are one of the battle-hardened soldiers of this army, and I thank you so much for enjoying and also being a longtime viewer and supporter. It always helps us out a lot, and I'm glad to know that a lot of people do enjoy the content because of, like I've said before, it kind of sounds like a broken typewriter kind of thing. But if no one enjoyed it, I wouldn't really be having a fun time doing this, because I would feel like it would be pointless. And also, if the fundraisers didn't do well, I'd feel like it'd be pointless too. And so with that, I hope that it does address the comment, and I thank you so much for enjoying our channel. And so with that, we are on to the next question.
And Enforcer, it looks like everybody got a kick out of you saying that I go through and get the bots and stuff out of the chat. It looks like people were saying Executioner Matt, and I was just thinking, it reminds me of that episode of SpongeBob, just a really childish flashback here, when the human resources fish would come out of the back room of the
yeah, I know what you're
Krusty
talking
Krab.
about.
Yes,
And
it reminds me of that.
He would like punch his fist into his hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just a childish reference there for a moment. But anyways, let's get back to our super chats. We have a $5 super chat from Ned J10, who says, Enforcer, do we have any updates on the Iron Dome system from Israel, and has it reached Ukraine as of yet? Slava Ukraine.
And I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, we have not gotten any news or updates on that system. Israel said they'd send one, and then they never did. And so I don't know what's going on with that. It appears that it's almost on indefinite hold at this point. So I hope that that does answer the question. And I thank you very much for the support. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Lysychansk, who says, for an M777A2, the scoot and move march order is 2 minutes from the time of the end of the fire mission to the gun hooked up to the LMTV and moving.
Well, I thank you very much for the little tidbit of info. I didn't actually know it was 2 minutes. I was actually assuming it was closer to 5. So that's actually a very fast pack up and move time. And I would actually like to see that in action and see how fast that can be done. So with that, I thank you so much for the support and also sharing that little bit of information with us, because that's actually cool to know. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Scott2412S, who says, how many tanks does Ukraine have, and when will they use them in mass?
We don't know the exact number that the Ukrainians have, but we do have an idea that the Ukrainians have more tanks in the theater than the Russians do at this point, accounting for Russian losses, and also captured vehicles that the Ukrainians are now using. So sadly, I can't give you an exact number on that figure, but we do know that it is more than the Russians have as of the last count. Well, not really the last count, but the last approximation of how many tanks both sides have. Was there a last part to that question, Matthew, that I'm not answering, or was that the whole question?
He said, how many tanks does Ukraine have, and when will they use them in mass?
I don't think tanks ever get used in mass anymore these days, and I think it's actually bad for them to be used in mass. Whenever we see the Russians using them in a large group, they usually just end up being destroyed, kind of like one tank. So I don't actually think they will want to use them in mass. I think they'll just want to spread them out and use them very sparsely wherever they're needed, but never really group them up, because that could just lead to heavy losses. So I hope that that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And it is now time to recognize a few more donations without comments. We have two $5 donations. We have one from Greg Shealy and WL. We also have a $2 donation from Junebug, a $2 donation from Merwin, and a $4 donation from Junebug with the 72 on the end of the name. So thank you very much to all of you once again for your support of the channel. I know I sound like a broken record, but we really do mean it, and we thank you very much for all of your generosity and your willingness to support this channel to help us keep running. So, up next, we have, let's see here. We have 4 more super chats left until we get to our live chat questions. So up next, we have a $5 super chat from Vasily, who says, I second your pharma ads reasoning. It is in fact propaganda, bypassing doctors and causing opioid crises.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I don't really go into the opioid stuff, too much, because that's kind of but anyways, I don't really go into that side too much. But what I care about is just the simple stuff, like heart medicine and stuff like that, that really just annoys me that kind of stuff is advertised on television, because I believe that television ads ought to be about consumer items instead of medicinal items. Like, for example, like a new toaster, a stove, maybe a funeral home service. I mean, I saw one in Britain, so I was like, hey, that's a idea for an ad. But, stuff like that, stuff that people can actually buy and that a layman could actually get some useful information out of, and doesn't really need to know a lot of additional information. However, with medications in general, there's a lot of stuff that a normal person watching TV like me is not going to know about that medicine that a doctor would know. And so it's really stupid to advertise directly to me, because then I'm going to go into the doctor's office and say, yes, I would like a Perlucacet, which is a certain company of drug. It's a fake one that I came up with. And then the doctor goes, well, I mean, like, Perlucacet's a really bad drug, like compared to all of the other ones that do the same thing. This one causes a lot of problems for normal people. And then I go, I don't care. I like the ad. I saw it on TV. I want Perlucacet. And then I get Perlucacet and I'm screwed over because I saw an ad and that encouraged me to go get that particular kind of drug. And that's why I don't like that, because I feel like it's trying to advertise to people who are not really educated on the drugs, and then they go in there and they try and get stuff that's not necessarily good for them. So I hope that that does address what I'm thinking about. I'm not really, the opium thing is a whole other situation and a whole other issue, but that's kind of what I'm looking at. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment, at least what I'm thinking about. And I'm glad that you do agree with me, at least in some degree, and I hope that you can agree with me still on what I'm saying here. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $4 donation from John Doe, who says, Slava Ukraine, and let us continue supporting them.
And I do agree. I hope that we do continue to support them. Of course, this channel will always support them until the end, running Sunday night fundraisers every single week until this war comes to a close. And so I hope that does at least address how this channel will keep on going, and I hope that Western governments continue to provide support as much as possible. And so I hope that that does address the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $2 donation from C.A. Lags, who says, for the spam fund, have you tried Masubi yet?
I have not tried the Masubi yet. I wish I could, but I sadly haven't. But I do thank you very much for supporting the spam fund, because we do love, well, I love my spam. Matthew doesn't like spam. Poor Matthew, he's missing out. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And for our last super chat of the night, we have a $2 donation from AC0, who says, hi Enforcer and hi Matt and the Leaf Spring Army. Whoa.
I think that was supposed to be a whoop. Was it spelled whoop?
They said whoa.
Oh, whoa. I thought you said whoop. I was like, what? But anyways, I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad that you do enjoy the channel and that you are supporting the Leaf Spring Army. It's always good to have high morale amongst the troops, eh? And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. And whoa. And so with that, I thank you once again. And we're going to be moving on to our last super chat. We had one come in, and then after that, we're going to answer 2 live chat questions, and then we're going to round out the stream.
And for our last super chat, losing my mind there for a minute, comes from Mike Lazembi, who puts in an $8 donation US and says, love your channel, found it because of Starsky, who is doing great stuff as well. No question, just a respectful request to plug him daily. You both are helping a lot of folks, and cheers from Canada, who loves Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. And yeah, Starsky's doing a lot of help as well. He has been on the stream a couple of times and has helped us to raise large amounts of funds in our fundraisers to, of course, help out organizations that are operating in Ukraine. And so I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're now going to move on to the live chat questions, but due to us being very pressed for time, and this is entering marathon length, we'll only be able to get to 2 live chat questions. And so with that, which one is the first one?
So the first one we have is from Scott Mensing, who says, Enforcer, it seems the jet shot down shown on Sunday was Ukrainian and a result of friendly fire. Did you hear that on your end?
I did hear that on my end. I forgot to correct that at the beginning of this stream, but thank you for reminding me. It was, in fact, a Ukrainian jet that was shot down by friendly fire. I hate to say that. That's, of course, unfortunate, but that was the best documented aircraft that's ever been shot down in the history of war. We had multiple perspectives of that thing, from when it got shot to when it was crashing to when it had crashed. And so I hope that that does address the question. It was actually a Ukrainian aircraft that was shot down by friendly fire after we figured that out a while later. It appears to have been some zealous reporting on other people's ends and also my end to say it was a Russian aircraft shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. Half of that story was correct, but the part about it being a Russian aircraft was not. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person to put in a question while we are literally going into sleep deprivation?
So let's see here. I'm just looking through our questions to make sure I pick out the most relevant one that everybody's probably going to find interesting here. Just a moment, and I'm trying to vet a few questions. Let's see. So I think the one we're going to go through here is from Packeting, who says, Enforcer, have any of the Russian-owned pipelines through Ukraine been destroyed? If not, then why not?
I don't believe they have, and I believe that may have to do with something of international politics more so than Ukraine, because destroying those pipelines could start jeopardizing energy, I guess you could say, security in Western countries, which of course could be considered something of a lashing out at them. And so I think that may be why they haven't done anything to them, because as of right now, I have not heard of any information or any reports of the Ukrainians attacking the pipelines or shutting them off. So I don't really know, honestly, much about those pipelines. I do know that they exist, but I haven't really read up on them. And beyond that, they kind of just exist in their own universe in the background, which no one really touches on all too much. So I hope that that does address the question, at least in a way. I think that they're not cutting them off because Western European countries still rely on Russian oil and gas imports to a decent bit. And so with that, I hope that it does answer the question, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. Now, tonight's stream has been a marathon. It's lasted 3 hours and 27 minutes as far as I'm looking at the timer over there. And so, I hope you all have enjoyed a great deal. If you are new to this channel and you've sat all the way through the question segment, while it hasn't been as long as on other nights, the news was much longer tonight than it was on normal nights. I hope you have enjoyed. And if you have been around during this question segment, you are certainly a trooper and you're enjoying this. So please make sure to subscribe. We do upload these streams, or run these streams every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays, where we cover the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine and also give analysis as to what's going on. We also upload daily summaries. Those have now been put to around 6:30 Eastern Time when they're usually uploaded, and those are summaries of the highlight videos of the day and also give a little bit of a rundown as to what's going on. And so if you do enjoy these videos and this information, please make sure to stick around because you will certainly enjoy it. We also have a link in the description below to the Discord so that way you can join our Elite Spring Army community, and we also have a link to the map below, so you can actually check out this map as it showed up today on stream for yourself. You can already see that around 5,000 people have viewed this map already, and you can be one of those people. You can click on every single marker on the map, and then click on the link, and it'll take you straight to the video that is on there, if it hasn't been deleted on Reddit. And so with that, I thank you all once again, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Take care, and I'll see you all tomorrow, once again, at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, ready for day 105 of the news. Thank you all once again, and I'll see you tomorrow.